The copper smell of blood filled her nostrils as Rebecca Sinclair clutched the wounded Apache warrior to her chest. His breathing came in ragged gasps, each one weaker than the last. Behind them, her cabin blazed against the night sky, an inferno of orange and red that cast their shadows long across the dusty ground. The angry shouts of the mob grew closer. "Go," the warrior whispered, his dark eyes reflecting the flames. "I know who you are. You should not die for me." Rebecca tightened her grip, feeling his blood seep through her dress. "No," she replied, her voice steady despite the fear pounding in her chest. "I've been running for too long." The crowd crested the hill, torches held high, hateful faces twisted in the flickering light. She closed her eyes and waited for the inevitable. 23 days earlier, the morning air in Whispering Pines Canyon carried the scent of sage and dust. Rebecca Sinclair paused in her gathering, straightening her back against the ache that came from bending over her medicinal herbs. At 28, she sometimes felt twice that age, her body carrying the weight of memories heavier than any physical burden. The canyon stretched before her, a vast watercolor of ochre and rust, punctuated by the deep green of ponderosa pines. This remote corner of the Arizona Territory had been her home for nearly 2 years now, as long as it had been since she buried her father and fled Boston with nothing but his medical books and the weight of his unfinished quest for justice. Dr. Edward Sinclair, decorated Army surgeon of the Union forces, had put a pistol in his mouth one rainy March evening. The official report cited melancholia as the cause, but Becca knew better. It was the nightmares that had killed him. Nightmares filled with the screams of Apache women and children, their blood on his hands in more ways than one. Becca tucked a strand of chestnut hair behind her ear and knelt again, her fingers gently plucking yarrow blossoms. Her father's leather-bound journal sat beside her collection basket, its pages worn from constant reference. Inside were not just medical notes, but detailed drawings of Apache medicinal plants and their uses. Knowledge he had collected while stationed at Fort Graham, knowledge that came at a terrible price. "You can't heal your father's sins," she whispered to herself, an admonishment that had become a daily ritual. Yet here she was, studying his notes, practicing his medicine, trying to find redemption for a man beyond saving. The snap of a twig brought her head up sharply. In this wilderness, unexpected sounds meant danger. Becca reached slowly for the Remington revolver tucked at her waist, a necessary companion in these parts. The brush rustled again, and she held her breath. A doe emerged, its large eyes regarding her warily before bounding away. Becca exhaled, her shoulders relaxing. The encounter reminded her of her place here, always an intruder, always watchful. As the sun climbed higher, she gathered her basket and journal and began the trek back to her cabin. The path wound through a narrow gully where the shadows offered brief respite from the heat. It was there, in the coolness between stone walls, that she heard the groan. At first, she thought it might be the wind playing tricks, whistling through the rock formations. But then it came again, distinctly human, filled with pain. Becca hesitated, her hand instinctively moving to her revolver. Griffin's Crossing had been abuzz with rumors of Apache raids on outlying ranches. Sheriff Davis Franklin had warned her just last week to stay vigilant, especially living so far from town. "Hello?" she called cautiously, her voice echoing against the stone walls. "Is someone there?" No answer came, only another pained moan. Becca moved forward slowly, her boots crunching on gravel. Around a bend in the gully, she found him. The man lay crumpled against the rock face, his copper skin slick with blood. His black hair hung in matted strands around a face contorted in pain. The traditional breechcloth and moccasins marked him as Apache, though his chest was bare, revealing a vicious bullet wound just below his right collarbone. His breathing came in short, labored gasps. Becca froze. Every instinct told her to turn around, to pretend she had never seen him. An Apache warrior, wounded and alone in this territory, was a death sentence for anyone who helped him. The townsfolk of Griffin's Crossing already viewed her with suspicion. Harboring an enemy savage would confirm their worst assumptions. Yet as she stared at the wounded man, time seemed to slow. She thought of her father's journal filled with detailed drawings of plants and notes on Apache healing methods, knowledge gleaned from the very people he had later helped to slaughter. She thought of the Hippocratic oath her father had taken and then betrayed, the same oath she had sworn to herself when she took up his medical bag. "Above all, do no harm," she whispered. The wounded warrior's eyes fluttered open at the sound of her voice. Dark, pain-filled eyes met hers, wary but defiant even in his weakened state. He tensed, one hand fumbling for a knife that wasn't there. "I won't hurt you," Becca said softly, raising her empty hands to show she meant no threat. "I'm a healer." His eyes narrowed with suspicion, but he lacked the strength to move. Blood continued to seep from his wound, pooling beneath him. Without treatment, he would be dead by nightfall. In that moment of stillness, with the canyon silent around them and the man's life ebbing away before her eyes, Becca made her decision. Perhaps she couldn't heal her father's sins, but she could choose a different path. She approached slowly, keeping her movements deliberate and calm. The warrior watched her through half-closed eyes, his body tense despite his weakness. When she knelt beside him, she could smell the copper tang of blood and the sweat of a man who had been running for his life. "I need to stop the bleeding," she explained, though she knew he likely didn't understand her words. "I'm going to help you." He said nothing, but his eyes never left her face as she tore a strip from her petticoat and pressed it against his wound. He flinched at her touch but didn't fight her. The bullet had gone clean through, which was fortunate, no need to dig for it, but the blood loss was severe. Becca worked quickly, applying pressure until the bleeding slowed. The warrior's skin felt hot to the touch. Infection had already set in. She would need her supplies from the cabin. "I need to move you," she said, meeting his gaze. "You can't stay here." Whether he understood her words or just her intent, his eyes showed a flicker of comprehension. With effort, he tried to push himself up from the ground. Becca slipped her arm around his waist, bearing as much of his weight as she could. He was tall and lean, all sinew and muscle, but weakened by blood loss. Even so, his pride was evident in the way he fought to stay upright as they began their slow, painful journey toward her cabin. The half-mile back felt like 10. The warrior stumbled several times, his breathing growing more labored with each step. By the time the cabin came into view, nestled among the pines with smoke still wisping from its chimney, both were drenched in sweat. "Almost there," Becca encouraged, though she wasn't sure if it was for his benefit or her own. As they approached the cabin, the warrior suddenly stiffened, his eyes scanning the clearing with alarm. "It's all right," she assured him. "No one else is here. Just me." The tension didn't leave his body as she helped him through the door and eased him onto her narrow bed. His eyes darted around the cabin's interior, taking in the shelves of books, the jars of herbs, the medical instruments laid out on a clean cloth by the wood stove. His gaze lingered on the photographs on the mantel. Her father in his Union Army uniform, her mother's portrait in an ornate silver frame. Becca busied herself gathering supplies, clean bandages, alcohol, needle and thread, herbs for poultice. The warrior's eyes tracked her every movement. Wary as a cornered wolf, she felt the weight of his gaze as she heated water on the stove and prepared her instruments. "This will hurt," she warned as she returned to his side with a cloth soaked in alcohol. "But it will prevent the rot." She began cleaning the wound, washing away dried blood and dirt. The warrior's body tensed at the sting, a soft hiss escaping between clenched teeth, but he remained still. As she worked, Becca found herself speaking softly, explaining each step as she would to any patient, though she doubted he understood a word. "The bullet went through clean, which is a mercy. No fragments to dig for, but there's infection starting. I'll need to draw it out with a poultice." His chest rose and fell rapidly under her hands, whether from pain or fever she couldn't tell. As she cleansed the exit wound on his back, her fingers brushed against something that made her pause. A raised scar, crescent-shaped, just below his left shoulder blade. The mark was deliberate, not the random result of injury, but a symbol. Becca felt a chill run through her as recognition dawned. She had seen this exact mark before sketched in her father's journal, the tribal identifier of a specific band of Chiricahua Apache, the very band that had been present during the massacre her father had participated in. Her hands trembled slightly as she continued her work, her mind racing. This wasn't just any Apache warrior. This was a member of the band her father had helped destroy. If he knew who she was, who her father was, the warrior stirred, his dark eyes finding hers. Had he noticed her reaction? Could he see the sudden fear in her face? She forced her features into the neutral expression she had perfected during her medical training. "Lie still," she instructed, her voice steadier than she felt. "I need to stitch the wound now." She threaded her needle with catgut, the same kind her father had used on Union soldiers during the war. The warrior watched her preparations, his gaze unreadable. When she began the first stitch, his entire body went rigid, but he made no sound. Becca worked methodically, her stitches small and neat, closing first the exit wound on his back, then the larger entry wound on his chest. As she tied off the final stitch, she noticed his breathing had grown more labored, his skin hotter to the touch. The fever was worsening. She prepared a poultice of yarrow and comfrey, herbs mentioned in her father's journal as used by the Apache themselves, and bound it to the wound. Then she brewed a strong tea of willow bark and elderberry, a remedy for fever and infection. "Drink," she urged, lifting his head slightly and holding the cup to his lips. After a moment's hesitation, he sipped the bitter brew, grimacing but not refusing. With the immediate treatment complete, Becca sat back on her heels, studying her patient. The warrior's eyes were closed now, his face less guarded in his exhaustion. She wondered who he was, what his name might be, how he had come to be shot and left for dead in her canyon, and she wondered what he would do if he knew the truth about her. Night had fallen by the time she finished tending to him. The cabin was dark save for the glow of the wood stove and a single oil lamp. The warrior had fallen into a fitful sleep, his brow furrowed even in unconsciousness. Becca checked his fever again. Still high, but not dangerously so. The real battle would come in the night, as his body fought the infection. She settled into the rocking chair beside the bed, her father's journal open in her lap. She turned to the pages that detailed the Chiricahua band, their healing traditions, their beliefs about sickness and health. The words blurred before her tired eyes, but one passage stood out with terrible clarity. "The warriors bear the mark of the crescent moon upon their flesh, burned there in a ritual of manhood. They are the fiercest of Mangus's band, sworn to protect their people unto death. It was these marked men who fell first under our rifles, defending the women and children we were ordered to remove from the canyon." Becca closed the journal with trembling hands. In saving this warrior, she had invited her father's nightmare into her home. Yet as she looked at the sleeping man, she saw not an enemy, but simply a human being in need. Whatever sins lay between their peoples, this moment, this choice to heal rather than harm, felt right. She dozed fitfully in the chair, waking at intervals to check his fever and change the poultice. Toward dawn, the warrior began to mutter in his sleep, words in a language she didn't understand but recognized from her father's phonetic transcriptions. Apache words, prayers perhaps, or memories. His fever had spiked, his skin burning beneath her touch. Becca soaked a cloth in cool water and bathed his face and chest, trying to bring the fever down. As the first light of dawn filtered through the cabin windows, his eyes suddenly flew open, wild and unfocused. "Cain," he gasped, the English words startling amid his Apache utterances. "Cain." Becca froze, cloth still in hand. Was he referring to the biblical Cain, the first murderer? Or was it a name? She leaned closer. "Who is Cain?" she asked softly. But the warrior had already slipped back into fevered unconsciousness, his body trembling with chills despite the heat radiating from his skin. Becca continued her ministrations, brewing stronger medicine, changing the poultices, bathing his fevered body. By midday, the crisis had passed. His fever broke in a rush of sweat that soaked the bedding, his breathing growing deeper and more regular. As she changed the linens beneath him, a flash of metal caught her eye. Around his neck hung a small leather pouch. Curiosity got the better of medical propriety, and she gently opened it. Inside was a folded scrap of paper. Becca hesitated, knowing she was violating his privacy, but her need to understand who he was and why he had been shot overcame her scruples. She unfolded the paper carefully. It was a rough drawing, not unlike those in her father's journal, but newer. It showed a circle with a jagged line through it, some kind of symbol or brand. With a jolt, she realized she had seen this symbol before. In the final pages of her father's journal, among his increasingly disturbed ramblings about guilt and retribution, he had sketched this exact mark repeatedly. Beneath it, he had written a single word: Cain. Becca's hands shook as she refolded the paper and returned it to the pouch. Whatever connection existed between this warrior and her father went deeper than she had imagined. The coincidence was too great. This man had been searching for something or someone connected to her father's past. The warrior stirred, his eyes opening. They were clear now, alert and wary, taking in his surroundings with new awareness. His gaze settled on Becca, studying her with an intensity that made her breath catch. "You are a medicine woman," he said in accented but clear English. Becca couldn't hide her surprise. "You speak English." A ghost of something, pride perhaps, or irony, flickered across his face. "I speak many things." "What's your name?" she asked, grateful for the chance to communicate, but wary of what might follow. He hesitated, then replied, "Tokala." "Tokala," she repeated, testing the sound of it. "I'm Rebecca Sinclair." "Becca." He nodded once, acknowledging her introduction, then asked, "Why do you help me?" It was a simple question with a complicated answer. Becca chose the simplest truth. "I'm a healer. You needed healing." Tokala's dark eyes seemed to look through her, searching for deeper motives. "White healers do not help Apache." "I'm not most white healers," she replied, busying herself with checking his bandages to avoid his penetrating gaze. He winced slightly as her fingers probed the wound, but it looked clean. No fresh bleeding, no sign of increasing infection. "You use our medicine," he observed, nodding toward the poultice. Becca hesitated. "I learned about your healing ways. The herbs are effective." "From who did you learn?" The question she had been dreading. "From books," she said, not quite a lie. "An observation." Tokala said nothing, but his eyes never left her face. The silence stretched between them, filled with unspoken questions and suspicions. Finally, he broke it. "I must go soon. My people wait." "You're too weak," Becca objected. "The wound will reopen. The fever may return." "I have survived worse," he replied simply. Before she could argue further, the distant sound of hoofbeats reached them. Becca's heart raced as she moved to the window, peering carefully around the edge of the curtain. A rider was approaching, the distinctive blue uniform of the cavalry visible even at a distance. "Someone comes," Tokala said, already trying to push himself upright. "Stay down," Becca ordered, her mind racing. "It's a cavalry officer." Tokala's eyes flashed with alarm, his hand instinctively reaching for a weapon that wasn't there. Becca made a quick decision. "Hide under the bed. Quickly." To her relief, he didn't argue, rolling from the bed to the floor with a suppressed grunt of pain. By the time the hoofbeats reached her yard, Tokala was hidden, and Becca had smoothed the bed covers, hiding any evidence of her patient. A sharp knock came at the door. Becca took a deep breath, composing her features into a mask of calm surprise, and opened it. The man on her porch stood ramrod straight, his cavalry uniform immaculate despite the dust of the trail. His face was weathered by sun and years, deep lines etched around cold blue eyes. The insignia on his uniform marked him as a captain. "Miss Sinclair?" he inquired, his voice clipped, informal. "Yes," she replied, keeping her tone neutral. "What brings the cavalry to my door, Captain?" "Wade, Captain Elias Wade, newly assigned to Fort Graham." He removed his hat, revealing close-cropped gray hair. "I'm making the rounds of outlying settlements. Sheriff Franklin mentioned you live alone out here. Thought I should introduce myself." There was something in his gaze that made Becca's skin crawl, an assessment that went beyond normal curiosity. "That's very thoughtful, Captain, but unnecessary. I manage quite well on my own." His eyes moved past her, scanning what he could see of the cabin's interior. Dangerous country for a woman alone, especially with the Apache stirring up trouble again. "I haven't had any trouble," Becca replied evenly. Wade's gaze returned to her face, sharpening. "No, consider yourself fortunate, then. 3 ranchers dead in the past month. Families slaughtered. Apache work, without question." Becca thought of the wounded man hidden beneath her bed, wondering if he had been involved in any such attacks. She doubted it. His wound was fresh, and he had been alone. "That's terrible news," she said, her concern genuine if not for the reasons Wade might assume. "But as I said, I've seen no sign of trouble here." Wade studied her for a long moment, as if weighing her words. "Your father was a military man, wasn't he? I seem to recall the name Sinclair." A chill ran down Becca's spine. "He served in the war, yes. A surgeon, if I'm not mistaken. Distinguished service." Wade's eyes never left hers. I believe our paths crossed once, though it was many years ago. Becca's mouth went dry. Had this man been present at the massacre? Had he known her father personally? She forced her voice to remain steady. My father passed away 2 years ago. My condolences, Wade replied, though there was no sympathy in his tone. Well, Miss Sinclair, I won't take up more of your time, but a word of warning, there's been reports of a particular Apache scout in these parts. A dangerous man, brother to the war chief Natona. If you see any sign of Apache, you ride straight to town. Don't try to handle it yourself. Thank you for the warning, Captain, Becca said, eager now to end the conversation. I'll be vigilant. Wade settled his hat back on his head with deliberate precision. See that you are. Good day, Miss Sinclair. She watched as he mounted his horse and rode away, her heart pounding in her chest. Only when he had disappeared from view did she close the door and lean against it, exhaling a shaky breath. He knows you, came Tokala's voice from beneath the bed. He emerged slowly, his movements stiff with pain, but his eyes alert. No, Becca replied, though uncertainty colored her voice. He knew my father, perhaps. Tokala's expression was unreadable. He is Cain, the word from his fevered mutterings. The captain? Wade is Cain? Tokala nodded grimly. His men wear the mark of the broken circle. They kill our people and blame Apache for their own murders. Becca thought of the symbol on the paper, the same one her father had drawn obsessively in his final days. But why? Why kill settlers and blame your people? Land, Tokala replied simply. The settlers have what Wade wants. When they do, he claims their land for the government, but really for himself. It was a terrible accusation, but not an implausible one. Becca had heard whispers of corruption among frontier military officers, land grabs disguised as peacekeeping operations, fortunes made on the backs of both settlers and natives. And you, she asked, what were you doing when you were shot? A flicker of wariness crossed Tokala's face. Watching, learning. You're a scout, Becca guessed, remembering Wade's warning about the brother of a war chief. Tokala said nothing, which was answer enough. Becca moved to the stove, needing something to do with her hands as she processed this information. She added wood to the fire and set water to boil for tea, her mind racing. If what Tokala said was true, Captain Wade was using Apache raids, real or manufactured, to pursue his own agenda. And her father had known something about it. You should leave this place, Tokala said as she returned with 2 cups of tea. Wade will return. He suspects. Suspects what? Becca asked, handing him a cup. Tokala met her eyes directly. That you are not what you seem. Before she could question him further, a soft knock at the door made them both freeze. It wasn't the authoritative rap of Captain Wade returning, but a gentler, more hesitant sound. Tokala tensed, ready to hide again, but Becca motioned for him to wait. She approached the door cautiously. Who is it? She called. Martha Jenkins, dear, came a wavering voice. Just bringing you some of my fresh bread, like I promised. Becca relaxed slightly. Martha was the widow of a former soldier, one of the few people in Griffin's Crossing who had shown Becca any real kindness since her arrival. The old woman had no love for the military, and even less for town gossip. Give me a moment, Martha, Becca called, turning to Tokala. She can be trusted, she whispered, though she wasn't entirely certain of that herself. But stay out of sight. Tokala nodded, moving silently to the far corner of the cabin where shadows would hide him. Becca opened the door to find Martha Jenkins on her porch, a cloth-covered basket in her gnarled hands. The old woman's face was lined with years of frontier hardship, but her eyes remained sharp and kind. Thought you might be running low on provisions, Martha said, offering the basket. There's bread and some of my raspberry preserves. Thank you, Martha. You're too kind. Becca accepted the basket, but didn't invite her in as she normally would have. Martha studied her face with the keen perception of the elderly. You've got shadows under your eyes, girl. Not sleeping well. Just busy with my herbs, Becca replied. Spring brings so many to gather. Martha nodded, but her gaze drifted past Becca to the interior of the cabin. For a heart-stopping moment, Becca thought she might have spotted Tokala, but the old woman's next words had nothing to do with hidden warriors. That new captain came through town yesterday. Wade. Martha's voice dropped lower. Richard, my late husband, served with him briefly. Never had a good word to say about the man. Said he had more ambition than conscience. Becca's interest sharpened. Did your husband ever mention a symbol? A circle with a jagged line through it? Martha's eyes widened slightly. Where did you hear about that? I found it in some old papers, Becca hedged. The old woman glanced around nervously, then stepped closer. That's the mark of Wade's special unit. They called themselves the Cleaners. Richard wouldn't speak of what they did, but he'd wake screaming about it some nights. She peered intently at Becca. You be careful around that man, Miss Sinclair. He leaves nothing but sorrow in his wake. With that cryptic warning, Martha squeezed Becca's hand and turned to go, her arthritic steps slow but determined. Becca watched her leave, a new weight of dread settling in her stomach. As she closed the door, she found Tokala standing in the center of the room, no longer hiding. The old one knows more than she says, he observed quietly. Martha's husband served with Wade, Becca explained, setting the basket on the table. She says that symbol, the broken circle, belongs to a unit called the Cleaners. Tokala's face darkened. We know this name. They are the ones who come in the night, who leave no survivors, not even children. A chill ran down Becca's spine as she thought again of her father's journal, his increasing paranoia, his final desperate act. Had he been part of this unit? Had the guilt finally broken him? I need to know what you know, she said, her voice low but urgent. About Wade, about this symbol. My father. She caught herself, realizing she was about to reveal too much. Tokala studied her, his dark eyes seeming to peer into her soul. Your father, he prompted. Becca took a deep breath. My father was haunted by something he did during his service, something involving the Apache. I think it may have been connected to Wade. It wasn't the whole truth, but it wasn't a lie either. Tokala seemed to weigh her words, deciding how much to trust her. Finally, he nodded. I will tell you what I know, he said, if you will tell me why you use Apache medicine and speak of us in your sleep. Becca felt as if the ground had dropped from beneath her feet. What do I say? A ghost of a smile touched Tokala's lips. Many things, names, places. His eyes held hers. Apologies. The revelation struck her like a physical blow. Her nightmares, her father's nightmares, had followed her even here. What else had she revealed in her sleep? How much did this man already know about her? Before she could form a response, Tokala swayed slightly, his face paling as his strength ebbed. Despite his pride, the ordeal of hiding and the tension of the past hour had taken their toll on his wounded body. You need to rest, Becca said, grateful for the excuse to postpone this dangerous conversation. She helped him back to the bed, noting with concern that his skin felt hot again, the fever returning. Tomorrow, Tokala murmured as he sank onto the mattress, his eyes already closing with exhaustion. Tomorrow we will speak truth. Becca nodded, though she wasn't sure what truth she was ready to share. As she placed a cool cloth on his forehead, she wondered what tomorrow would bring, and whether either of them was prepared for the consequences of honesty. Outside, the sun began its descent behind the canyon walls, casting long shadows across the clearing. In the distance, a coyote called, a lonely sound that seemed to echo Becca's own isolation. She had come to this wilderness, seeking escape from her father's sins, only to find herself entangled in their aftermath. And somewhere out there, Captain Elias Wade, Kane, rode with his broken circle, leaving death in his wake and drawing ever closer to her door. Morning light filtered through the cabin windows, painting golden rectangles on the rough-hewn floor. Becca stirred from her uncomfortable position in the rocking chair, her neck stiff from a night spent watching over her patient. Tokala slept fitfully, occasionally murmuring words in his native tongue. His fever had broken again sometime in the early hours, and his breathing had grown more regular. Becca rose quietly, careful not to wake him. Her routine continued despite her unusual guest. Water needed fetching, the fire needed stoking, herbs needed sorting. The normality of these tasks provided a strange comfort in the face of the revelations that awaited her. Yesterday's conversation with Captain Wade and Martha Jenkins had left her with more questions than answers. Questions that twined around her father's secrets, like poison ivy on an oak. As she moved about the cabin, she found herself studying Tokala in the unguarded state of sleep. The fierce wariness that had characterized his conscious hours was softened now. revealing a face younger than she had initially thought, perhaps 30, with high cheekbones and a strong jaw. The scar on his chest, the crescent moon mark of his tribe, rose and fell with each breath. When she returned from drawing water from the nearby spring, she found him awake and watching her. The wariness had returned to his dark eyes. "You did not run," he observed, his voice still rough with sleep. Becca set down the water bucket. "Why would I run?" "Many would, a white woman alone with Apache. Fear makes people foolish." "I'm not afraid of you," she replied, though it wasn't entirely true. Her fear, however, had less to do with his being Apache and more to do with what he might discover about her family's past. A ghost of a smile touched his lips. "Then you are either very brave or very foolish." Becca busied herself preparing a simple breakfast of cornmeal mush, sweetened with a spoonful of Martha's raspberry preserves. She could feel Takala's eyes on her as she worked, assessing, calculating. "You promised me truce today," she said finally, bringing him a bowl of the hot cereal. "About Wade, about the broken circle." Takala accepted the food with a nod of thanks. "And you promised truth about why you speak Apache words in your sleep." A fair exchange, though one Becca dreaded. She settled into the rocking chair with her own bowl, weighing how much to reveal. "You first," she said. "Tell me about Wade." Takala took a spoonful of the mush, considering his words. "Wade is not just any bluecoat. He is a hunter of people. 3 winters ago, he led soldiers to many Apache camps, not to move us to reservations, as your government claims. To kill." Becca's stomach nodded. 5 years ago would align with her father's increasingly disturbed journal entries. "Most soldiers follow orders," Takala continued. "They kill because they are told. Wade kills because he hungers for it, and for what comes after." "The land," Becca supplied, remembering their conversation from the day before. Takala nodded. "The land, the gold beneath it, the water that flows through it. After Apache are blamed for killing settlers, no one questions when the army claims their farms." "And the broken circle?" Martha called them the cleaners. A shadow passed over Takala's face. "They come after the main force leaves, to make sure no one remains alive to tell the truth. They wear the symbol so others know to stay away. These killings belong to them." The cereal turned to ash in Becca's mouth as she thought of her father's involvement. Had he been one of those cleaners? Or had he merely treated their victims, cataloging their wounds and deaths with clinical detachment until the weight of complicity became too much to bear? 2 moons ago," Takala continued, "my brother Natona learned of a plan. Wade seeks a new territory, this canyon, these waters. He will create Apache raids to scare or kill settlers, then claim the land." "So you were sent to gather proof," Becca guessed. Takala's eyes met hers. "I followed Wade's men. They attacked a ranch to the north, killed a family, left signs to blame Apache. I was seen. They hunted me for 2 days before their bullet found me." He paused. "Now it is your turn, healer. Why do you know our medicine? Why do you speak our words?" The moment of truth had arrived. Becca set down her bowl, her appetite gone. "My father was an army surgeon at Fort Graham," she began, her voice steady despite the churning in her stomach. "He documented many things about the Apache, medicinal plants, treatment methods. I learned from his journals." "A healer does not learn such things from paper alone," Takala observed quietly. "And you speak words of sorrow in your sleep, words of regret." Becca's hands twisted in her lap. "My father was present during operations against the Apache. What he saw, what he was part of, it haunted him until his death." "The massacre at Shadow Canyon," Takala said, his voice suddenly hard. 3 winters ago." Becca's breath caught. She had never known the name of the place, only that it had been a slaughter rather than the peacekeeping mission reported in official documents. Her father's journal had described women and children cut down as they fled, wounded warriors executed where they fell. "Yes," she whispered. "I believe so." Tokala's face had gone still, unreadable. "And your father? What was his role?" "He was the medical officer. He didn't fire a weapon, but—" Becca swallowed hard. "He was there. He treated the wounded soldiers. He documented the dead. The mark on my back, Takala said. You recognized it. How? The direct question caught her off guard. It was in his journal, the crescent moon of the Shadow Canyon Band. A long silence stretched between them, heavy with unspoken accusations. Becca waited for his anger, his hatred. She deserved both. Instead, Tokala asked quietly, "Why did you save me?" The question cut to the heart of her own conflicted motives. "Because it was the right thing to do," she answered simply. "Because I'm not my father. Because maybe in some small way, it begins to balance what was done." Tokala studied her face, searching for deception. Whatever he saw there seemed to satisfy him. "Your father, he took his own life?" Becca nodded, surprised by his insight. "How did you know?" "The weight of such deeds is too heavy for some souls to carry." Another silence fell, but this one felt different, less accusatory, more contemplative. Tokala shifted on the bed, wincing slightly as the movement pulled at his stitches. "I should change your bandages," Becca said, grateful for the chance to move past the difficult conversation. As she gathered fresh linens and herbs for a poultice, Tokala watched her with new understanding. "You seek forgiveness," he observed, "for sins not your own." "Someone should ask for it," she replied, her voice tight. "Someone should try to make amends." "And this is why you live alone in the canyon? Your penance?" Becca hadn't thought of her isolation in such terms before, but there was truth in his assessment. "Partly," she admitted, "and partly because I didn't belong anywhere else after he died." She began unwrapping the bandages from his chest, her touch clinical but gentle. The wound looked better, the angry redness had receded, and the edges were beginning to knit together cleanly. As she applied the fresh poultice, her fingers brushed against the crescent scar again. This time Tokala caught her wrist. "This mark means I am sworn to protect my people," he said, his dark eyes holding hers. "As you are sworn to heal. We are not so different, healer." The unexpected kindness in his words brought a sting of tears to Becca's eyes. She blinked them away quickly, focusing on rewrapping the bandages. "You should be able to travel in another day or two," she said, "if the infection doesn't return." Tokala released her wrist. "Wade will return before then. He suspects. Then we'll need to move you somewhere safer." But even as she said it, Becca knew there were few options. The canyon offered limited hiding places, and taking him into town was unthinkable. A sudden knock at the door made them both freeze. Becca's heart hammered in her chest as she quickly finished securing the bandage, then motioned for Tokala to stay silent. She approached the door cautiously. "Who is it?" she called. "Martha, dear, and Hannah. She's taken a bad turn." Becca opened the door to find Martha Jenkins cradling her granddaughter in her arms. The girl, normally bright-eyed and curious, lay listless against her grandmother's shoulder, her face flushed with fever. "She can't catch her breath," Martha explained, her voice tight with worry. "Started last night. Dr. Clark says it's just a spring chill, but his powders aren't helping." "Bring her in," Becca said without hesitation, concern for the child overriding her awareness of Tokala's presence. She glanced back quickly, but he had already vanished. Into the small back room, she guessed. Martha carried Hannah to the bed Tokala had just vacated. The 12-year-old's breathing came in short, labored gasps, her small chest heaving with the effort. When Becca placed a hand on her forehead, the skin burned with fever. "How long has she been like this?" Becca asked, already reaching for her stethoscope, one of her father's instruments she had inherited. "Started with just a cough 3 days ago," Martha explained. "Worsened yesterday. By midnight, she couldn't lie flat for the coughing." Becca listened to Hannah's chest, hearing the telltale crackle of fluid in the lungs. Pneumonia, and a severe case at that. She had treated it before with moderate success using conventional remedies, but the girl's condition was already advanced. "I need to prepare a steam treatment," Becca said, moving to her shelf of dried herbs, "and a tea for the fever." Martha hovered anxiously beside the bed, stroking Hannah's damp hair from her forehead. "Will she be all right?" Becca hesitated. The honest answer was that she didn't know. "We'll do everything we can," she promised instead. As she worked, selecting herbs and heating water, she was acutely aware of Tokala hidden in the back room. He could surely hear everything, and she wondered what he made of this new development. Would he see Hannah as just another white settler, Part of the encroachment on his people's land? Or would he recognize a child in need, no different from the children of his own tribe? For now, she focused on what she knew. She prepared a steam tent by draping a blanket over Hannah and a pot of steaming water infused with thyme and eucalyptus. The fragrant steam would help loosen the congestion in the girl's lungs. For the fever, she brewed a simple tea of willow bark and honey. But deep down, she knew these remedies might not be enough for a case this severe. As Hannah's breathing grew more labored, Becca's concern deepened. She needed something stronger, something that perhaps only Tokala could provide. This will be bitter, she warned as she helped Hannah sit up enough to sip the tea, but it will help the fever. The girl managed a few swallows before a coughing fit overtook her. The sound was worse now, a deep, wet rattle that shook her thin frame. Becca exchanged a worried glance with Martha. They both knew that sound, had heard it before in those who didn't survive winter illnesses. As the morning stretched into afternoon, Hannah's condition worsened. The steam treatments provided temporary relief, but each bout of coughing left her weaker. Her fever remained dangerously high, despite the willow bark tea. By late afternoon, her lips had taken on a bluish tinge, a sign that she wasn't getting enough air. I don't know what else to do, Becca admitted in a low voice to Martha as they stood by the stove, out of Hannah's hearing. The conventional treatments aren't working fast enough. Martha's lined face crumpled with fear. There must be something, anything. Becca hesitated, her mind turning to her father's journal and the Apache remedies documented there. Some had proven remarkably effective for respiratory ailments, particularly a preparation made from creosote bush and the inner bark of ponderosa pine. But she had never attempted it herself, relying instead on the more familiar treatments of her formal medical training. A soft sound from the bar room caught her attention, the deliberate clearing of a throat. Tokala had been listening, and the sound was clearly meant for her ears. An idea or a warning? Let me check my father's notes, Becca said to Martha. There might be something else we can try. She moved to the back room, ostensibly to retrieve her father's journal, but in reality to consult with Tokala. She found him sitting on the narrow cot, alert despite his wound. The child is very sick, he said without preamble. Becca nodded. Pneumonia. None of my usual remedies are working quickly enough. You think of Apache medicine, he guesses. Yes, my father documented a treatment for lung sickness, a preparation of creosote bush and pine bark. But I've never made it myself, and I'm not sure of the proportions. Tokala's expression remained neutral, but his eyes held a glimmer of something. Approval, perhaps. I know this medicine. It is strong. Could you show me how to prepare it correctly? Becca asked, aware that she was asking him to help save a white settler's child. Tokala was silent for a long moment, weighing something in his mind. Finally, he said, I will help, but the old woman must not see me. Relief washed over Becca. Thank you. I'll gather the materials and bring them here. She returned to the main room, finding Martha bathing Hannah's feverish face with a cool cloth. I need to gather some herbs, Becca explained. Will you stay with her? Martha nodded, her focus entirely on her granddaughter. Of course. Becca took her gathering basket and slipped outside. The late afternoon sun cast long shadows across the canyon as she searched for creosote bush, with its distinctive resinous scent and the fallen bark of ponderosa pines. She worked quickly, aware that Hannah's condition allowed little time for delay. When she returned, she brought the gathered materials directly to the back room where Tokala waited. His movements were stiff with pain, but his hands were sure as he showed her how to prepare the remedy, using a stone mortar to grind the creosote leaves and pine bark together with a small amount of water. This must be strained, he instructed, then boiled until only half remains. Add honey to make it easier for the child to take. As Becca worked under his guidance, she asked, How do you know so much about healing? A ghost of a smile touched his lips. Not all Apache are warriors. My mother was a healer. She taught me before she joined the ancestors. The simple statement reminded Becca that there was more to this man, to his people, than the savage stereotype perpetuated in frontier towns. Families, traditions, knowledge passed down through generations. Things her father had documented clinically but never truly appreciated. Once the medicine was prepared according to Tokala's instructions, Becca returned to Hannah's bedside with the dark, strong-smelling liquid. What is that? Martha asked, her nose wrinkling at the unfamiliar scent. An herbal remedy for lung infections, Becca explained vaguely. It's powerful but bitter. Hannah needs to take as much as she can. Martha looked skeptical, but desperate enough to try anything. If you think it will help, Becca carefully lifted Hannah's head and held the cup to her lips. Small sips, Hannah. I know it doesn't taste good, but it will help you breathe. The girl managed several swallows before turning her face away, but it was enough for a first dose. Becca set the remainder aside for later. Now we wait, she said, trying to sound more confident than she felt. The medicine needs time to work. The hours that followed were tense. Hannah's fever continued to rage and her breathing remained labored. Becca administered more of the Apache remedy every hour, along with the conventional treatments. Martha dozed fitfully in the rocking chair, exhaustion finally overcoming her worry. In the darkest hours before dawn, Hannah's fever broke suddenly, her nightgown and the bedding soaked with sweat. Her breathing, while still congested, had lost the terrifying rattle. When Becca listened with the stethoscope, the fluid in her lungs seemed to be loosening, her airways clearer. Martha, Becca called softly, waking the older woman. Her fever's broken. Martha was instantly alert, moving to her granddaughter's side. Hannah's eyes were closed, but her sleep was natural now, her chest rising and falling in a steadier rhythm. Thank God, Martha whispered, tears streaming down her lined face. And thank you, Becca. Your medicine worked. Becca felt a surge of gratitude toward Tokala. Without his knowledge, Hannah might not have survived the night. She'll need to continue taking the remedy for several days, she said, and plenty of rest, but I believe the worst has passed. As dawn light began to filter through the windows, Martha insisted on returning to town with Hannah. Her parents will be frantic, she explained, and I've imposed on your hospitality long enough. At least let me pack some of the medicine for you to take, Becca said, bottling the remaining remedy and writing instructions for its use. She helped Martha settle Hannah, now awake but drowsy, in the small wagon they had arrived in. You have a gift, Becca, Martha said as she prepared to leave. Your father would be proud. The words sent a complicated pang through Becca's chest. She wasn't sure pride was what her father would feel, perhaps relief that some good had come from his dark legacy. As the wagon disappeared down the trail toward Griffin's Crossing, Becca returned to the cabin, a bone-deep weariness settling over her. She found Tokala in the main room, seated at her small table. He looked pale but steady. The child will live? He asked. Becca nodded, gratitude welling up anew. Yes, thanks to your knowledge. I don't know how to repay you. There is no debt between healers, he replied simply. Knowledge is meant to be shared. She studied his face, noting the lines of pain around his eyes, despite his composed expression. You should be resting. Your wound needs time to heal. There is little time for healing, Tokala said, his voice hardening. Wade will not wait. I must return to my people with what I have learned. You're still too weak to travel far, Becca argued. The wound could reopen. Tokala's dark eyes met hers. And if I stay, I bring danger to your door. Wade is not a man who forgets or forgives. Before she could respond, the distant sound of hoofbeats reached them. Multiple horses approaching at a gallop. Becca's heart raced as she moved to the window, peering cautiously around the curtain. What she saw made her blood run cold. Captain Wade, accompanied by 4 cavalrymen, was riding hard toward the cabin. Wade, she hissed, turning back to Tokala. And soldiers, they're coming fast. Tokala was already on his feet, moving with the fluid grace of a man accustomed to danger, despite his injury. They must have followed the old woman's wagon tracks. Becca's mind raced. There was no time for Tokala to flee. In his weakened state, he wouldn't get far on foot. The back room offered only temporary concealment. A thorough search would reveal him. The cellar, she decided suddenly, under the rug. My father built it for storing medicines that need to stay cool. She pulled back the woven rug near the hearth, revealing a trapdoor set into the wooden floor. Tokala didn't waste time arguing. He descended the narrow ladder into the darkness below as Becca handed down his moccasins and shirt. The hoofbeats grew louder, nearly at her door. Stay silent, no matter what you hear, she whispered urgently. I'll get rid of them. Tokala caught her wrist before she could close the trapdoor. Be careful, Becca. Wade is a snake. The use of her first name, the first time he had called her anything but healer, sent an unexpected warmth through her chest despite the danger. She nodded once, then closed the trapdoor and replaced the rug just as the riders reached her yard. Becca took a deep breath, composing her features into a mask of surprised irritation. She opened the door before they could knock, finding Captain Wade dismounting from his horse, his men fanning out around the cabin. "Captain," she greeted him coolly, "this is becoming a habit." Wade didn't smile. His cold blue eyes swept past her to the cabin's interior. "Miss Sinclair, I understand you had visitors last night." Martha Jenkins and her granddaughter, Becca confirmed, keeping her voice steady. "The child was ill. I treated her." Wade stepped closer, invading her space in a deliberate show of intimidation. "And did you have any other visitors recently? Perhaps someone in need of more urgent medical attention?" Her heartbeat thundered in her ears, but she met his gaze without flinching. "No, just Martha and Hannah." "You wouldn't lie to an officer of the United States Army, would you, Miss Sinclair?" Wade's voice was soft, dangerous. "I have no reason to lie, Captain. Now, if you'll excuse me, I've been up all night with a sick child and I'd like to rest." Wade made no move to leave. Instead, he signaled to his men. "Search the premises, thoroughly." "You have no right," Becca began, but Wade cut her off. "I have every right, Miss Sinclair. We're tracking a dangerous Apache scout believed to be wounded in this area. Harboring such an individual would constitute a serious offense." Becca was forced to step aside as the soldiers pushed past her into the cabin. They began a methodical search, upending her bed, rifling through her supplies, checking the back room. Her heart nearly stopped when one of them paused near the hearth, his boot inches from the edge of the rug covering the trapdoor. "There's blood here," the soldier called, pointing to a small, brownish stain on the floorboards that Becca had missed in her cleanup. Wade's eyes locked onto hers, triumph glinting in their cold depths. "Blood, Miss Sinclair? From the child's illness, perhaps?" "I cut myself yesterday," she lied smoothly, "while preparing herbs." "A convenient explanation," Wade remarked, his tone making it clear he didn't believe her. He moved closer to the hearth, and for a terrible moment, Becca thought he would discover the trapdoor. Instead, his attention was caught by her father's journal, which lay open on the table. "Interesting reading material," he said, picking it up. "Your father's, I presume?" Becca's throat went dry. "Yes, medical notes." Wade flipped through the pages, his expression changing subtly as he recognized the content. "Dr. Edward Sinclair," he mused. "I remember him now, a skilled surgeon, somewhat soft-hearted for frontier work." The way he said soft-hearted made it sound like a disease. Becca fought to keep her expression neutral. "You served with him?" "Occasionally our paths crossed," Wade replied vaguely. His finger traced a line in the journal. "He had a fascination with savage remedies, I recall, unusual for a man of science." One of the soldiers approached from the back room. "Nothing, sir, but there are fresh herbs drying and some kind of medicine brewing." Wade's gaze returned to Becca, sharp and assessing. "For the child's illness, no doubt." His tone made it clear he suspected otherwise. He closed the journal with a snap. "My men will continue searching the area. If we find evidence that you've been harboring an Apache, Miss Sinclair, the consequences will be severe." "I have nothing to hide, Captain," Becca replied, the lie bitter on her tongue. Wade studied her face for a long moment, then set the journal down. "We shall see." He turned to his men. "Continue the search outside. Check every inch of the property." The soldiers filed out, but Wade lingered. When they were alone, he stepped closer, his voice dropping to a near whisper. "Your father kept detailed records of his work at Fort Graham," he said, his eyes never leaving hers, "including the operation at Shadow Canyon." Becca's blood turned to ice. "I wouldn't know. I haven't read all his journals." "No," Wade's smile held no warmth. "A pity. They contain valuable lessons about the consequences of misplaced sympathies." The threat was thinly veiled. Wade knew, or strongly suspected, that her father's records contained damning information about the massacre, about Wade's role in it. "I'll keep that in mind," Becca replied, fighting to keep her voice steady. Wade held her gaze for another long moment, then turned and left without another word. Becca remained in the doorway, watching as he mounted his horse and directed his men to widen their search into the surrounding woods. Only when they had ridden well out of sight did she close the door and rush to the trapdoor. Tokala emerged from the cellar like a shadow, his movements fluid despite his injury. His dark eyes were alert, wary. They will return, he said simply. Wade knows. How could he know? Becca asked, though she feared she already had the answer. The old woman, Martha. Someone may have seen her wagon leaving. Or perhaps she spoke to someone in town about your Apache remedy. Becca hadn't considered that possibility. The distinctive smell and taste of the medicine would be recognizable to anyone familiar with Apache treatments. If Martha had mentioned it to Dr. Clark or anyone else in Griffin's Crossing, "We need to get you out of here," she said decisively. "Tonight, you're right, Wade will return, and next time he'll find the cellar." Tokala nodded. "I must reach my people. Tell them what I have seen, what I have learned about Wade's plans." Becca's mind raced. Tokala was stronger, but still in no condition for a long journey on foot, and the area would be swarming with Wade's men by nightfall. "I'll take you," she decided suddenly, "on horseback. I know trails through the canyon that Wade's men won't." Tokala looked surprised. "You would risk this? For an Apache?" "For you," Becca corrected, "and for the truth about what Wade is doing." Something shifted in Tokala's expression, a softening, a new awareness. For a moment, they simply looked at each other, the barriers of race and history temporarily suspended. The moment broke when a distant gunshot echoed through the canyon, Wade's men still searching. "We should go as soon as it's dark," Becca said, turning practical again. "I need to pack supplies and prepare my horse." Tokala nodded. "I will help. What can be done now while we wait?" They spent the remaining daylight hours in tense preparation. Becca gathered medical supplies, food, and water, packing them into saddlebags while Tokala prepared arrows from materials in the cabin. His hands worked with practiced efficiency, crafting deadly weapons from seemingly innocuous items. As dusk approached, Becca led her horse, a sturdy brown mare named Willow, from the small corral behind the cabin. She saddled her quickly, securing the packs while Tokala kept watch for returning soldiers. "Wade's men are camped at the canyon entrance," he reported when he returned from scouting. "4 men. The captain is not with them." That was concerning. If Wade wasn't with his men, where was he? Becca pushed the worry aside, focusing on the immediate task. "We'll take the North Trail. It's rougher terrain, but it joins with Pine Creek after about 5 miles. We can follow the creek to the foothills, where your people camp." Tokala regarded her with surprise. "You know where my people are?" Becca hesitated. "Not exactly, but my father's journals mention seasonal camps in the northern foothills, and I've seen smoke from distant fires in that direction occasionally." As darkness fell completely, they prepared for departure. Tokala, though still weak from his wound and days of inactivity, moved with determined purpose. Becca took a last look around the cabin that had been her home for the past 2 years. Would she ever return here? Or was she, like her father, about to become a fugitive from her own people? A sudden pounding at the door froze them both. "Miss Sinclair," Sheriff Davis Franklin's voice called. "Open up. We need to talk." Becca exchanged an alarmed glance with Tokala. The sheriff's presence complicated everything. Franklin wasn't Wade's man. He was generally fair-minded, if cautious, but he was still a lawman. He would have no choice but to arrest Tokala and possibly Becca as well for harboring him. "Stay hidden," she whispered to Tokala, who melted back into the shadows of the back room. Taking a deep breath, she opened the door. Sheriff Franklin stood on her porch, his weathered face grave in the lantern light. Unlike Wade's polished military bearing, Franklin wore the practical clothes of a frontier lawman, a dusty Stetson, worn leather vest over a simple shirt, and a gun belt that had seen better days. His gray eyes were tired but alert. "Sheriff," Becca greeted him, trying to sound normal. "What brings you here so late?" Franklin glanced past her into the cabin, his gaze sharp despite his casual demeanor. "May I come in? This isn't a conversation for doorways." Reluctantly, Becca stepped aside. As Franklin entered, she saw his eyes quickly survey the room, noting the packed saddlebags by the door, the disturbed hearth rug, the signs of hasty preparation. His hand didn't move toward his gun, but she could sense his heightened awareness. "You're leaving," he stated rather than asked. "I was considering it," Becca admitted, seeing no point in denying the obvious. "Captain Wade's visit earlier today was unsettling." Franklin nodded slowly. "Wade has that effect on people." He removed his hat, turning it in his hands in a gesture that seemed almost nervous. "Miss Sinclair, I need to be direct. Are you harboring an Apache warrior? The blunt question caught her off guard. She opened her mouth to deny it, but Franklin raised a hand. Before you answer, he continued, his voice lowered, you should know that Martha Jenkins told me about the medicine you use for Hannah. Apache medicine. Medicine you couldn't have prepared correctly without help. Becca's heart sank. Martha hadn't meant to betray her. She had probably just been singing Becca's praises to anyone who would listen, grateful for Hannah's recovery. Sheriff, she began, but Franklin cut her off again. I'm not here to arrest you, he said, surprising her. Or him. I'm here to warn you. Wade returned to town an hour ago. He's organizing a larger search party, not just soldiers, but townsmen as well. He's been telling folks that you're harboring the Apache responsible for the Marshall Ranch massacre. Becca's blood ran cold. That's a lie. Tocala had nothing to do with any massacre. The admission hung in the air between them. Franklin's expression remained carefully neutral. So there is an Apache here, he said quietly, and you know his name. Becca straightened her shoulders. Yes, I found him wounded in the canyon and treated him. He was shot by Wade's men after witnessing them attack the Marshall Ranch and stage it to look like an Apache raid. Franklin absorbed this information with a slight narrowing of his eyes. That's a serious accusation. It's the truth. Wade is using fear of Apache raids to drive settlers off their land he wants for himself or for whoever is backing him. The sheriff was silent for a long moment, his weathered face thoughtful. Finally, he said, I've had my suspicions about Wade since he arrived. Something about the timing and pattern of these raids never sat right. And I knew Thomas Marshall. He was friendly with the Apache, even traded with them. It made no sense that they'd target him first. Becca felt a surge of hope. Then you believe us? I believe there's more going on than meets the eye, Franklin replied cautiously. But what I believe doesn't matter much against a captain of the U.S. cavalry with a mob at his back. From the shadows of the back room, Tocala stepped forward, his movement deliberate and dignified despite his injury. Then you have come to arrest us. Franklin turned to face him, his hand moving instinctively toward his gun before stopping. The two men regarded each other warily across the small cabin. No, the sheriff said finally. I came to warn you. Wade's gathered about 20 men from town. They're liquored up and looking for someone to blame for their troubles. They'll be here by dawn, and I can't stop them. He turned back to Becca. You need to be gone before they arrive. Relief washed over Becca. Thank you, Sheriff. Franklin nodded grimly. Don't thank me yet. You're heading into dangerous territory either way. He looked at Tocala. If what you say about Wade is true, there needs to be proof. The word of an Apache won't stand against a white officer's. I have seen his men attack the settlers, Tocala replied. I can lead others to where they have hidden evidence of their deception. And I have my father's journals, Becca added. He documented incidents involving Wade, incidents that were never reported officially. Franklin considered this. It might be enough to take to the territorial governor, especially if I add my own statement about the suspicious nature of these raids. He put his hat back on, decision made. Get your Apache friend to his people. Find whatever proof you can. I'll try to keep Wade occupied here as long as possible. Why are you helping us? Becca couldn't help asking. The sheriff's weathered face darkened. I fought in the war, Miss Sinclair. Saw enough killing to last 10 lifetimes. I became a lawman to bring justice, not to help men like Wade profit from more bloodshed. He turned to leave, then paused. The North Trail has a patrol on it. Take the East Ravine instead. It's a harder climb, but it will bring you to Cougar Ridge. From there, you can reach the Apache territory without crossing open ground. With that parting advice, Sheriff Franklin left, his footsteps fading into the night. Becca and Tocala stood in silence for a moment, absorbing what had just happened. He is an unusual white man, Tocala observed. He's a good man, Becca replied, moving quickly to gather the last of their supplies. And he's right. We need to leave now. They slipped out of the cabin and into the darkness, leading Willow quietly until they were well away from the clearing. The night was clear, stars speckling the vast Arizona sky, providing just enough light to find their way without lanterns that might alert Wade's patrols. Following Franklin's advice, they headed east, toward a narrow ravine that cut through the canyon wall. The going was slow and treacherous in the darkness, with loose rock underfoot and steep walls that had to be navigated carefully. Tokala moved with surprising agility despite his wound, though Becca could see the strain in his face when the moonlight caught it. "We should rest," she suggested after they had been traveling for nearly 2 hours, having reached a small plateau halfway up the ravine. "You need to conserve your strength." Tokala shook his head. "There is no time for rest. Wade's men will find your empty cabin at dawn and begin tracking us." He was right, of course, but Becca worried about his wound reopening from the exertion. "At least let me check your bandages." Reluctantly, Tokala allowed her to examine the wound by moonlight. The stitches were holding, though a small amount of fresh blood had seeped into the bandage. She rebound it tightly, aware of his eyes on her face as she worked. "Why do you come with me?" he asked suddenly. "You could have sent me alone. Return to your people." The question caught her off guard. "I'm not sure I have people anymore," she admitted. "Not after helping you escape. And besides, you still need medical attention." Tokala's dark eyes studied her face. "There is more. You seek something." Perceptive as always, Becca finished tying the bandage before answering. "The truth, I suppose, about my father, about what really happened at Shadow Canyon. Wade knows, and I need to know too." "Even if the truth brings more pain?" "Even then," she replied firmly, "I've lived with half-truths and suspicions long enough." They continued their journey, the eastern sky gradually lightening from black to deep blue as dawn approached. The ravine opened onto Cougar Ridge, a narrow spine of rock that offered a clear view of the canyon below and the distant foothills to the north where the Apache camps were located. As they paused to catch their breath, Becca looked back toward her cabin, now a tiny speck in the distance. A cloud of dust on the main trail caught her attention, riders approaching from the direction of Griffin's Crossing. "Wade's men," she said grimly. The sheriff couldn't delay them long. Tokala followed her gaze. "We must move faster. My brother's camp is still half a day's journey." They pushed on, taking turns riding Willow over the rougher terrain. The sun had fully risen, beating down on them with the relentless intensity of late spring in Arizona. Water became a concern as their supplies dwindled. The landscape grew more rugged, dotted with stands of juniper and pinon pine that offered occasional shade, but little else. By midday, Tokala was visibly struggling, though his pride would not allow him to complain. When they stopped in the shadow of a large rock formation, Becca insisted on examining him again. The exertion had taken its toll, the wound was seeping blood, and fever had returned, flushing his copper skin. "We need to rest here," she insisted. "Just for an hour or two. You need medicine and real rest." Tokala shook his head stubbornly. "Wade's men will not stop. We cannot stop either." "You'll die if we don't," Becca argued. "What good is reaching your people if you arrive as a corpse?" The blunt statement seemed to surprise him, a ghost of a smile touching his lips. "You have a warrior's tongue, healer." They compromised on a brief rest. Becca prepared more of the herbal remedy for his fever and changed his bandages while Tokala fashioned crude weapons from branches and stones. Preparation for trouble he clearly expected to find. As she worked, Becca found herself studying his face more closely than medical necessity required. The stern lines of his jaw, the proud set of his mouth, the depth of his dark eyes that seemed to hold ancient wisdom despite his relatively young age. There was strength there, but also a thoughtfulness she had rarely encountered in the men of Griffin's Crossing. "Why do you stare?" Tokala asked suddenly, catching her gaze. Becca felt heat rise to her cheeks. "I was just checking for signs of fever." His eyes held hers, disbelieving but not displeased. "You are a poor liar, healer." Before she could formulate a response, a distant sound caught their attention. Hoofbeats, moving fast along the ridge they had just traversed. Wade's men had picked up their trail more quickly than expected. "We need to move," Tokala said, all trace of their brief moment of connection erased by the urgency of danger. "Now." They gathered their supplies hastily and continued northward, staying off the ridge and using the scattered juniper groves for cover. The hoofbeats grew closer, then split, the search party dividing to cover more ground. "They're trying to surround us," Becca realized with growing dread. "Cut us off before we reach Apache territory." Tokala nodded grimly. "We must reach the river, cross it, My people control the land beyond. The river, Becca knew he meant the fast-flowing creek that marked the unofficial boundary between settler territory and Apache lands. It was still miles away over increasingly difficult terrain. They pushed on, desperation lending them speed despite exhaustion. The sound of pursuit grew louder, closer. Occasional shouts echoed across the landscape as Wade's men called to each other, coordinating their hunt. As they crested a small rise, Tokala suddenly pulled Becca down behind a boulder. Below them, no more than half a mile distant, 4 riders were moving parallel to their path. Leading them was Captain Wade himself, his rigid posture and blue uniform unmistakable, even at a distance. He leads the hunt himself, Tokala murmured. This is personal for him. Becca watched the riders, her heart pounding. How did he find us so quickly? He is a hunter, Tokala replied simply, and he knows these lands. They remained hidden until the riders passed, then continued their journey with even greater caution. The afternoon sun beat down mercilessly, and their water supply was dangerously low. Becca could see that Tokala was struggling, though he refused to complain or slow their pace. As the sun began its descent toward the western horizon, the distant glint of water came into view. The river. Becca felt a surge of hope. Just a little further, and they would reach relative safety. The crack of a rifle shot shattered that hope. A bullet whined past them, kicking up dust from the rock just feet away. More shots followed, sending them scrambling for cover behind a fallen tree. They've spotted us, Becca gasped, fear clenching her stomach. Tokala's face was grim. 4 men, coming from the east. He pointed to a stand of juniper about 100 yards ahead. We must reach those trees. They offer better protection and a path to the river. Another volley of shots peppered their position. Becca flinched, ducking lower behind the log. They'll kill us before we get halfway there, she protested. Tokala's eyes met hers, determination burning in their depths. I will draw their fire. When they focus on me, you run for the trees. No, Becca grabbed his arm. You're injured. You can't outrun them. I don't need to outrun them, he replied calmly. Only distract them long enough for you to reach safety. The selflessness of his offer stunned her. I won't leave you to die. And I will not let you die because of me. Tokala's voice was firm, his decision made. My people are near. If you reach the river, they will find you. Before she could argue further, he moved suddenly, darting from their cover and sprinting laterally across the open ground. As predicted, the gunfire immediately shifted to follow him. Tokala zigzagged, making himself a difficult target as bullets kicked up dust around him. Becca watched in horror and admiration at his bravery. When the shooters were fully engaged in trying to hit the moving target he presented, she knew it was time. Taking a deep breath, she ran toward the juniper stand, pushing herself harder than she ever had before. The shooters noticed her too late. By the time they redirected their fire, she had nearly reached the cover of the trees. A bullet grazed her arm, sending a line of fire across her skin, but she kept running, diving into the protective shadows of the junipers. From her new position, she could see Tokala still drawing fire, now pinned down behind a rock outcropping. 4 of Wade's men were advancing on him, rifles ready. Of Wade himself, there was no sign. Becca's mind raced. She couldn't leave Tokala to die, but she had no weapon beyond her small revolver, useless at this distance. As she watched in helpless horror, the men closed in on Tokala's position. Then, without warning, the scene changed dramatically. Silent shadows moved among the rocks behind Wade's men. One moment, the pursuers were advancing confidently. The next, they were falling, arrows protruding from their backs and chests. The attack was swift, merciless, and utterly silent. Apache warriors, at least a dozen of them, materialized from the landscape as if born from the rocks themselves. They moved with lethal efficiency, dispatching Wade's men before they could even raise an alarm. Within moments, the shooting had stopped, replaced by an eerie silence. Tokala emerged from his hiding place, raising his hand in greeting to the warriors. Words were exchanged in Apache, too distant for Becca to hear. Then Tokala turned and gestured toward her hiding place, pointing her out to the others. Fear gripped on Becca's heart. These warriors had just killed 4 men without hesitation. Would they view her as just another enemy to be eliminated? She considered running but knew it would be futile. Instead, she slowly stood, hands raised to show she carried no weapon. Tokala approached, accompanied by a taller warrior whose bearing marked him as a leader. This man's face was more lined than Tokala's, his long black hair streaked with gray at the temples. The family resemblance was unmistakable. This must be Natona, Tokala's brother and war chief of their band. "Becca," Tokala called. "Come, you are safe now." She emerged cautiously from the junipers, aware of the warrior's eyes tracking her every movement. As she drew closer, she could see the suspicion in Natona's gaze, the instinctive distrust of a white face in his territory. "This is the healer who saved my life," Tokala explained to his brother in English, presumably for her benefit. "She risked everything to help me escape Wade." Natona's expression remained impassive. "Why would a white woman help Apache?" he asked, his English more accented than Tokala's, but clear. Before Becca could answer, the sound of a rifle being cocked cut through the air. From behind a nearby rock, Captain Wade emerged, his weapon aimed directly at Natona's chest. "Because she's a traitor," Wade snarled, his cold eyes fixed on Becca, just like her father. Time seemed to freeze in that desert tableau. Wade with his rifle trained on Natona, the Apache warriors tensing like coiled springs, Becca's heart hammering against her ribs. The late afternoon sun cast long shadows across the rocky ground, painting everything in harsh contrast of light and dark. "Drop your weapons," Wade commanded, his voice steady despite being outnumbered, "or I put a bullet through your chief's heart." The Apache warriors didn't move, their dark eyes calculating. Becca could feel the tension building, like electricity before a storm. One wrong move, and the canyon would erupt in violence. "You are surrounded, Wade," Tokala said calmly. "My brothers will fill you with arrows before you can fire twice." A cold smile twisted Wade's lips. "Perhaps, but your chief will still be dead." His gaze shifted to Becca, "as will your traitorous doctor friend." Becca's mouth went dry. There was madness in Wade's eyes, the desperate calculation of a man with nothing to lose. She had seen that look before, in her father's eyes during his final days. "This doesn't have to end in bloodshed," she said, trying to keep her voice steady. "Lower your weapon. Face justice for what you've done." Wade laughed, a harsh, brittle sound that echoed off the canyon walls. "Justice? From savages and a woman who betrayed her own kind? I think not." His finger tightened on the trigger. "Your father lacked the stomach for what needed to be done. I see you're cut from the same weak cloth." The mention of her father struck Becca like a physical blow. "What do you know about my father?" "I know he was a coward," Wade spat. "He documented the Shadow Canyon operation in his precious journals, then couldn't live with it. Men like him have no place on the frontier." Understanding dawned on Becca with terrible clarity. "You were there at Shadow Canyon. You led the massacre." Wade's eyes gleamed with a perverse pride. "I did what was necessary. Those Apache were sitting on valuable land, land that could be developed, mined, land that was wasted on them." His gaze hardened. "Your father was supposed to report battle casualties. Instead, he kept records of what he called atrocities, threatened to expose us." The pieces fell into place, her father's nightmares, his increasing paranoia, his final desperate act. "So you silenced him," Becca whispered. "I gave him a choice," Wade corrected. "Destroy the evidence or face the consequences." He chose a third option. A smirk twisted his features. "Though I must thank him for keeping such detailed notes on Apache medicine. They've been useful in creating convincing scenarios." Becca's blood ran cold as the full scope of Wade's actions became clear. "You've been using my father's research to fake Apache attacks, to make the murders look authentic." "Clever girl," Wade mocked. "So much like your father. Too smart for your own good." While they spoke, Becca noticed subtle movements among the Apache warriors, repositioning, silent signals exchanged. Tokala had inched closer to her, his body angled protectively. "It's over, Wade," she said, trying to keep his attention fixed on her. "Sheriff Franklin knows what you've been doing. Even if you kill us all, the truth will come out." Something flickered in Wade's eyes, uncertainty perhaps. "Franklin is one man. My backers have connections throughout the territory. No one will believe an Apache-loving sheriff over a decorated army captain." "Your backers?" Becca seized on this new information. Who's funding these land grabs? Wade's expression closed. People who understand progress. People who see the future of this territory, not its primitive past. The rifle in his hand steadied. Enough talk. You've made your choice, Miss Sinclair. Now you'll die with your savage friends. Time seemed to slow as Wade's finger tightened on the trigger. Becca saw Tokala lunge toward her, felt his hands pushing her roughly aside. The crack of the rifle echoed through the canyon, followed immediately by the whisper of arrows slicing through air. Wade staggered backward, 3 arrows protruding from his chest, his shot gone wild. His eyes widened in shock, the rifle slipping from his hands. He opened his mouth as if to speak, but only blood bubbled forth. Then he collapsed, his body crumpling to the dust. The silence that followed was deafening. Becca found herself on the ground where Tokala had pushed her, his body half covering hers protectively. Around them, Apache warriors moved cautiously toward Wade's fallen form, making certain he was truly dead. "Are you hurt?" Tokala asked, his voice close to her ear. Becca shook her head, unable to speak. The suddenness of the violence had left her numb. Tokala helped her to her feet, his hands steady under her elbow. She stared at Wade's body, feeling neither triumph nor pity, only a hollow emptiness where justice should have been. Natona approached, his expression grave. "Wade speaks of others, backers. This is not finished." "No," Becca agreed, finding her voice at last. "His death won't end this. There are others involved, people with power and influence." "Then we need proof," Tokala said. "Evidence that will convince even white men's courts." Becca thought of her father's journals, now sitting in her abandoned cabin. "My father's records. They document Wade's actions at Shadow Canyon, and I have my own observations of his recent activities." She hesitated. "But will that be enough?" Natona and Tokala exchanged glances, some unspoken communication passing between the brothers. Finally, Natona nodded. "We have more," he said. "Wade's men left signs at each attack, things meant to blame Apache." His mouth tightened with disgust. "But they made mistakes, used marks from wrong tribes, left tracks a true Apache would never leave. If we can gather all this evidence," Becca said, hope kindling within her, "and take it to the territorial governor." "The woman bleeds," one of the warriors suddenly said in Apache, pointing to Becca's arm. Becca glanced down, surprised to see blood seeping through her sleeve from where the bullet had grazed her earlier. In the tension of confronting Wade, she had forgotten her own injury. "It's nothing," she said, "just a graze." Tokala frowned, examining the wound with careful fingers. "It needs cleaning. We should return to our camp before dark." Natona gave orders in rapid Apache, and the warriors moved with practiced efficiency, some gathering Wade's body, others collecting weapons and keeping watch. Within minutes, they were ready to move out. The journey to the Apache camp took less than an hour, much closer than Becca had expected. Nestled in a hidden valley protected by steep cliffs on 3 sides, the encampment consisted of several dozen wickiups arranged in a semicircle. Women paused in their work to watch the returning warriors, their expressions shifting from relief to suspicion when they spotted Becca. Children darted behind their mothers, peering curiously at the white woman in their midst. Elders emerged from the larger wickiups, their weathered faces impassive, but their eyes sharp with assessment. "They fear you," Tokala said quietly as they dismounted. "Few white people come to our camp in peace." Becca understood their wariness. In their position, she would feel the same. "I don't blame them." Natona spoke to the gathered people in Apache, explaining the situation in words Becca couldn't understand, but whose meaning she could guess from the glances thrown her way. Some faces softened, while others remained hard with suspicion. An elderly woman stepped forward, her silver-streaked hair bound in 2 long braids, her bearing dignified despite her advanced years. She spoke directly to Tokala, her tone questioning. "My aunt," Tokala explained to Becca. "She is our tribe's healer. She asked why I bring a white medicine woman to our camp." Becca waited as Tokala replied in Apache, presumably explaining how she had saved his life. The old woman listened intently, her dark eyes never leaving Becca's face. When Tokala finished, she approached slowly, studying Becca with penetrating scrutiny. "You use our medicine," she said in halting English. "Where you learn this?" The direct question caught Becca off guard. She could feel the eyes of the entire camp upon her, waiting for her response. Honesty seemed the only viable path. From my father's journals, she admitted, he learned from your people, but I have practiced these methods myself. They are effective. The old healer considered this, then nodded once. Show me your arm. Becca held out her injured arm, allowing the woman to examine the bullet graze with gentle, expert fingers. Without speaking, the healer led her to a nearby wickiup, gesturing for her to enter. Inside, the small dwelling smelled of herbs and smoke, bundles of dried plants hanging from the supports, pottery containers arranged neatly along one wall. The old woman worked in silence, cleaning Becca's wound with a solution that smelled of pine and some herb Becca didn't recognize. The sting was intense but brief, followed by cooling relief as a poultice was applied and the wound bandaged. You helped Takala, the healer said finally, securing the bandage. Now I help you. Balance. The simple statement contained a profound philosophy that resonated with Becca. Thank you, she said, meaning it deeply. When they emerged from the wickiup, Becca found Takala waiting outside. His own wound had been tended to, fresh bandages visible beneath his loose shirt. The camp had returned to its normal activities, though many still cast curious glances in her direction. Come, Takala said. Natona wishes to speak with us. He led her to a larger wickiup at the center of the camp. Inside, Natona sat with several older men, tribal elders, Becca guessed. They regarded her with varying degrees of suspicion and curiosity as she and Tokala took seats on woven mats across from them. We have discussed your situation, Natona began without preamble. Wade is dead, but as you said, others will come. We must act quickly. Becca nodded. We need to gather all available evidence and take it to someone with authority, someone who can't be bought by Wade's backers. The territorial governor, Tokala suggested. He has sent peaceful messengers to our camp before. He might listen. Governor Safford is known to be fair-minded, Becca agreed. But we would need irrefutable proof. My father's journals, your testimony, the evidence from the false raids. One of the elders spoke in Apache, his tone skeptical. Natona translated, he asks why we should trust white man's justice. Many promises have been broken before. It was a valid concern, one Becca couldn't easily dismiss. Justice isn't guaranteed, she acknowledged. But without it, the violence will continue. More of your people will die, as will innocent settlers caught in the middle. Another elder spoke, his words directed at Takala. Takala listened respectfully before responding in measured tones. A brief discussion followed among the elders, with occasional glances toward Becca. Finally, Natona turned to her. We will help gather this evidence. But we cannot go to the white man's town. It would mean death for us. I'll go, Becca offered. If you can help me collect the evidence, I'll take it to the governor. Not alone, Tokala said firmly. Wade's backers will try to stop you. I will accompany you. Natona frowned. It is too dangerous for you, brother. More dangerous to stay here, Tokala countered. Wade's men will come looking for revenge when he doesn't return. Our people should move to the summer grounds earlier than planned. This sparked another discussion among the elders, more heated this time. Becca waited patiently, aware that her presence influenced their deliberations but unable to understand the specifics. As night fell, torches were lit around the camp, casting flickering shadows across the gathered faces. The debate continued until one of the oldest elders raised his hand, silencing the others. He spoke at length, his voice thin but commanding respect. When he finished, Natona nodded. It is decided. We will move our people to the summer grounds at dawn. Tokala will accompany you to present evidence to the governor. If you have not returned in 7 days, we will know you have failed. The finality in his tone made Becca shiver. What happens if we fail? Natona's eyes were hard. Then we prepare for war, a war that neither side can truly win. The meeting concluded and Becca followed Tokala out into the night. Stars crowded the desert sky, impossibly bright and numerous away from the lamplight of civilization. Around them, the camp buzzed with activity as preparations began for the next day's journey. Your people are leaving their home because of me, Becca said quietly, guilt weighing heavily on her shoulders. Because I helped you. No, Tokala corrected. Because of men like Wade, we have moved many times before to avoid bloodshed. It is our way to adapt, to survive. They walked to the edge of the camp, where the valley opened to a view of the moon-silver desert beyond. Becca wrapped her arms around herself against the night chill, feeling suddenly very far from everything familiar. "What if we fail?" she asked, voicing her deepest fear. "What if the evidence isn't enough? Or what if Wade's backers are too powerful, too connected?" Tokala was silent for a long moment, considering her words. "Then at least we will have tried to find peace through truth. Few have done even that much." His simple philosophy touched something deep within her. "My father tried," she said softly, "in his own way, but he couldn't live with what he'd been part of." "He left you his knowledge," Tokala observed, "his medicine. Perhaps that was his way of making amends." Becca had never considered her inheritance in quite that light before. Her father's journals had always seemed a burden, a reminder of his complicity and atrocity, but they were also a repository of healing knowledge, a bridge between cultures that might otherwise be lost. "We should rest," Tokala said, breaking into her thoughts. "Tomorrow will be a long day." He led her to a small wickiup that had been prepared for her, a courtesy she hadn't expected. Inside, a bed of soft hides had been laid out, and a small fire pit glowed with dying embers. It was simple but comfortable, far more welcoming than she had anticipated. "The healer left medicines for you," Tokala said, pointing to several small pouches near the bedding. "For sleep and for strength tomorrow." "Thank you," Becca said, touched by the consideration. "For everything. Most men would have killed me when they discovered who my father was." Tokala's expression softened in the dim light. "Most white women would have left an Apache to die in the canyon." He hesitated, then added, "We are not defined by our father's deeds, Becca, only by our own." With that, he left her alone with her thoughts, the wickiup flap falling closed behind him. Becca sank onto the soft hides, exhaustion suddenly overwhelming her. The events of the past days, finding Tokala, treating his wounds, fleeing Wade, witnessing his death, crashed over her in a wave that left her trembling. She took one of the healer's pouches and brewed a small cup of tea as instructed. The aroma was unfamiliar but pleasant, hinting of sage and something sweeter. As she sipped the warm liquid, a sense of calm gradually replaced her anxiety. Her last conscious thought before sleep claimed her was of Tokala's words, "We are not defined by our father's deeds, only by our own." Dawn broke clear and cold, the desert air crisp with early spring. Becca woke to the sounds of the camp dismantling around her, quiet, efficient movement as the Apache prepared to relocate. She emerged from her wickiup to find Tokala waiting, two horses already saddled and provisioned for their journey. "You look rested," he observed. "The healer's medicine worked?" Becca nodded. "Better than I expected. I haven't slept that soundly in years." A ghost of a smile touched his lips. "Grandmother knows her craft well." "Grandmother?" Becca asked, surprised. "The healer is your grandmother?" "All elders are grandmother or grandfather in our way," Tokala explained. "But yes, she is my father's mother. She has taught me much of what I know of healing." This personal connection to the stern old woman gave Becca a new appreciation for the care she had received. "I'm honored she treated my wound." Nautona approached, interrupting their conversation. In his hands, he carried a small bundle wrapped in hide. "These are the proofs," he said, offering it to Becca. "Items from the false raids. Things no Apache would leave behind." Becca accepted the bundle, feeling its weight, both physical and symbolic. "I'll make sure they reach the right hands." "And these," Nautona continued, producing several papers from within his vest. "Maps drawn by our scouts. They show where Wade's men have attacked, where they have camped. And this," he handed her a small metal object, "is Wade's symbol, the broken circle, found on one of his men." The evidence was more comprehensive than Becca had dared hope. Combined with her father's journals and her own testimony, it might be enough to convince even the most skeptical authorities. "Thank you," she said, carefully storing everything in her saddlebags. "This may save many lives, both Apache and settler." Nautona's expression remained grave. "This is a rare chance for truth to be heard. Do not waste it." He turned to his brother. "You have 7 days to Kala, then we must assume the worst." The brothers clasped forearms in farewell, an embrace that spoke of deep bonds and shared history. Words were exchanged in Apache, too low for Becca to hear. Then Natona turned to her. "You are brave for a white woman," he said, his tone neither complimentary nor insulting, simply stating a fact. "But bravery alone will not keep you safe in the days to come. Listen to my brother. His eyes see what others miss." With that cryptic advice, he left them to oversee the tribe's departure. All around, wiki-ups were being dismantled, belongings packed onto travois pulled by sturdy ponies. Women carried infants in cradle boards. Older children helped with smaller bundles, and warriors maintained a protective perimeter around the moving camp. "They've done this many times," Becca observed, watching the efficient process. Tokala nodded, a shadow crossing his face. "Too many times. First from the Spanish, then the Mexicans, now the Americans. Always we must move, adapt, survive." His words carried generations of displacement and resilience, a history Becca had only glimpsed through her father's clinical documentation. "I'm sorry," she said, knowing the words were inadequate but needing to say them nonetheless. Tokala's dark eyes met hers. "You are not responsible for all white actions, Becca, just as I am not responsible for all Apache deeds." The simple wisdom of his statement struck her deeply. They were individuals making individual choices in a world that insisted on seeing them only as representatives of their respective peoples. They mounted their horses, Becca on her faithful willow, Tokala on a sleek pinto provided by his tribe. Their path would take them first to Becca's cabin to retrieve her father's journals, then to Griffin's Crossing to find Sheriff Franklin, and finally to Prescott to seek audience with the territorial governor. As they rode away from the dismantling camp, Becca glanced back one last time. The Apache moved in a long, orderly procession toward the distant mountains, yet another forced migration in their long history of survival. "Will they be safe?" she asked. "The summer grounds are high in the mountains," Tokala replied. "Difficult to reach, easy to defend. They will be safer there than here." They rode in companionable silence for several hours, following game trails and dry washes to avoid the more traveled routes where Wade's remaining men might be searching. The landscape gradually shifted from the rugged canyon country to the more familiar terrain surrounding Becca's cabin. As they approached the clearing, Tokala signaled for caution. "Wait here," he whispered, dismounting. "Let me scout first." He moved forward on foot, blending into the brush with the silent skill of an experienced hunter. Becca waited anxiously, scanning the area for any sign of danger. After several tense minutes, Tokala reappeared. "The cabin stands empty," he reported, "but someone has searched it thoroughly. Everything is disturbed." Becca's heart sank. "Wade's men must have torn it apart looking for you or for evidence." They approached cautiously nonetheless, Becca gasping softly when she saw the state of her home. The door hung from broken hinges, windows were smashed, and the interior had been ransacked. Books lay strewn across the floor, her medical supplies scattered, furniture overturned. "My father's journals," she murmured, moving immediately to the loose floorboard beneath her bed, where she had hidden the most damning volumes. To her immense relief, the hiding place remained undiscovered. She retrieved the 3 leather-bound books, clutching them to her chest. "They're still here." Tokala watched from the doorway, alert for any sign of danger. "Take only what we need. We should not linger." Becca nodded, gathering a few essential items: clean clothing, additional medical supplies, and the small portrait of her mother that had survived the destruction. Everything else would have to be abandoned. As they prepared to leave, the sound of approaching horses made them freeze. Tokala moved to the window, peering cautiously around the shattered frame. "3 riders," he reported. "One is the sheriff." Becca joined him at the window. Indeed, Sheriff Franklin was approaching, accompanied by 2 men she recognized from Griffin's Crossing: Thomas Bailey, the blacksmith, and Samuel Green, a rancher whose property bordered the canyon. "They're friends," she assured Tokala, "or at least not enemies." Tokala remained wary but followed her lead as she stepped out onto the porch to meet the approaching men. Sheriff Franklin reined in his horse, his weathered face showing relief at the sight of her. "Miss Sinclair," he called, "thank God you're alive. We feared the war when we found your cabin like this." "Wade's men," Becca explained. "They came looking for evidence." Franklin's eyes shifted to Tokala, who stood slightly behind her, poised for either flight or fight. Your Apache friend survived as well, I see. Bailey and Green tensed, their hands moving instinctively toward their weapons. Franklin raised a hand, stopping them. Easy, boys. If Miss Sinclair vouches for him, that's good enough for me. What's happened in town? Becca asked, noticing the men's grim expressions. Franklin dismounted, removing his hat. Wade's backers have shown themselves. 2 days ago, a man named Hollister arrived from Phoenix with a dozen hired guns and legal papers claiming ownership of half the canyon, including your property. Hollister? The name was unfamiliar to Becca. Represents some mining consortium, Franklin explained. Says they have federal approval to develop the region. They're pressuring folks to sell or leave, and not being particularly gentle about it. Tokala and Becca exchanged glances. This was the larger scheme Wade had hinted at, not just isolated land grabs, but a coordinated effort to seize the entire canyon. What about Wade? Becca asked carefully. Has he returned to town? Franklin's expression darkened. No sign of him, but Hollister claims he's operating with Wade's authority. Says the captain is conducting security operations against Apache hostiles. Wade is dead, Tokala stated flatly. Killed when he attempted to murder my brother and Becca. Bailey and Green shifted uncomfortably at this news, but Franklin merely nodded. Can't say I'm surprised. Wade always struck me as a man who'd die by violence. He studied them both. But his death won't stop Hollister and whoever's backing him. If anything, it'll give them more excuse to move against your people, he added, addressing Tokala directly. That's why we're gathering evidence, Becca explained. We have proof that Wade was fabricating Apache raids, killing settlers himself to justify seizing their land. We're taking it to the territorial governor. Franklin rubbed his jaw thoughtfully. Governor Safford is a fair man. If your evidence is solid, he might act. He hesitated. But Prescott is a 4-day ride, and Hollister's men are watching the main trails. They've already turned back several families trying to reach the territorial capital. We need another route, Tokala said. The old Spanish trail, Green suggested unexpectedly. When everyone turned to him, he shrugged. My grandfather used it to move cattle before the war. It's rough going, but it bypasses the main roads entirely. Franklin nodded. Sam's right. It's your best chance of reaching Prescott undetected. He turned to Becca. But you'll need more than evidence, Miss Sinclair. You'll need witnesses, white witnesses, he added with an apologetic glance at Tokala. Will you come with us? Becca asked. The sheriff shook his head regretfully. I can't leave Griffin's Crossing unprotected, not with Hollister's men throwing their weight around. But, he nodded toward Bailey and Green, these men have agreed to accompany you. Both have witnessed enough to corroborate your claims. Becca looked at the two men with newfound respect. They were risking much to stand against powerful interests. Thank you, she said simply. Bailey, a burly man with a thick beard and blacksmith's arms, shifted uncomfortably. Don't thank us yet, Miss Sinclair. We've got a hard journey ahead and no guarantee the governor will listen even when we arrive. He'll listen, Franklin assured them. Safford's ambitious, but he's no fool. He won't want a range war or an Apache uprising on his watch. Bad for business and worse for his political aspirations. They spent the next hour planning their route and gathering additional provisions. Franklin had brought fresh horses, food, and ammunition, all that could be spared from Griffin's Crossing. By midday, they were ready to depart, a small, determined band setting out on a desperate mission. As they prepared to mount up, Franklin took Becca aside. There's something else you should know, he said, his voice low. Martha Jenkins sent this for you. He handed her a folded piece of paper. Said it might help explain some things about your father. Becca unfolded the note, recognizing Martha's shaky handwriting. Becca, my Richard served with your father at Shadow Canyon 3 years ago. Your father spent the year after collecting evidence. He was killed just as he was preparing to testify, 2 years ago now. Wade made it look like suicide, but Richard always believed otherwise. Dr. Sinclair was the only man there with a conscience. He didn't take his own life out of guilt alone. He was silenced because he planned to testify before Congress about what really happened. Take care, child. The truth is more dangerous than you know. Martha, the revelation hit Becca like a physical blow. Her father hadn't been a coward who couldn't live with his complicity. He had been murdered for trying to expose the truth. The story she had accepted for 2 years, the shame she had carried, suddenly transformed into something else entirely. "Are you all right?" Franklin asked, noticing her pallor. Becca carefully folded the note and tucked it into her father's journal. "Yes," she said, her voice steadier than she felt. "Thank you for bringing this." As their small party rode away from the ruined cabin, Becca felt a strange sense of liberation. The home she had built in the canyon had never truly been hers. It had been a hiding place, a penance for sins that weren't her own. Now, riding beside Tokala toward an uncertain future, she felt more purposeful than she had in years. Their path took them west into rougher country, following Green's directions toward the forgotten Spanish Trail. By nightfall, they had covered nearly 20 miles, making camp in a sheltered arroyo where their fire wouldn't be visible from a distance. As they sat around the small flame, the dynamic between the four travelers was strained but civil. Bailey and Green clearly remained wary of Tokala, while he watched them with the careful assessment of a man accustomed to seeing white settlers as threats. Becca found herself in the role of bridge builder, drawing out each man's story to humanize them to one another. As the flames danced before them, Green broke the uneasy silence. "My wife died of fever last winter," he said, his weathered face tight with old grief. "Two young children at home, being raised by their aunt while I'm here." He glanced at Tokala, eyes narrowed slightly. "No offense meant, but my family's had trouble with Apache raiding parties before." "Your people," Tokala responded evenly, "would call it war. My people would call it survival." Bailey snorted. "Survival? That what you call slaughtering innocent families?" His hand moved unconsciously toward his holster. Becca tensed, but Tokala remained perfectly still. Only his eyes, reflecting the firelight, betrayed his heightened awareness. "My sister married a rancher," Bailey continued, voice thick with emotion. "Last spring their place was hit. Everyone said Apache did it, but something wasn't right about it. No livestock taken, nothing stolen, just killing." His gaze pierced Tokala. "That's your people's way?" "No," Tokala said after a long pause. "We take what we need, horses, weapons, supplies. We do not kill without purpose." "Doesn't bring back the dead, does it?" Bailey challenged. "Neither does blame without truth," Tokala countered. Green studied Tokala across the fire. "Sheriff Franklin started asking questions about these raids. Said the tracks made no sense. Apache don't ride shod horses." He pulled a worn pipe from his pocket. "Wade tried to shut him up. That's when I started wondering." "My children deserve peace," Green added, offering his tobacco pouch to Tokala in a hesitant gesture of truce. "So do yours, I expect." Tokala's surprise was evident as he accepted the tobacco. "My brother's son is 7 winters old. He has never known a time without fear of bluecoats." Bailey watched the exchange, still wary but softening. These men, Wade, Hollister, they're playing both sides, using fear to take what isn't theirs. He finally took his hand away from his gun. "I hate being made a fool of worse than anything." Becca witnessed the subtle shift in the camp's atmosphere. Not friendship, not yet, but something like grudging respect forming in the shared space between cultures. Common enemies sometimes forged unlikely alliances. "If we reach the governor," Green said, tamping tobacco into his pipe, "what happens after? Your people go back to raiding, ours to shooting?" Tokala accepted the pipe when offered, a significant gesture that wasn't lost on anyone present. "Perhaps we find a different way, one where both our children know peace." Bailey didn't look entirely convinced, but he nodded slowly. "First we have to survive getting to Prescott, and something tells me Hollister's men won't make that easy." The men fell into discussion of watches and routes, the initial hostility giving way to practical cooperation. Becca observed with quiet satisfaction how crisis had forced these men to see past generations of hatred, even if just enough to acknowledge each other's humanity. Later, as Green and Bailey slept, Becca sat beside Tokalao at the edge of camp, staring up at the star-filled swan. The night was cool but not cold, the desert holding the day's warmth in its rocky embrace. "Martha's note," she said quietly. "It suggests my father was murdered, that Wade killed him to prevent him from testifying about Shadow Canyon." Tokala considered this. It would be like Wade to kill a man and make it seem like weakness. All this time, Becca continued, I thought my father couldn't bear his guilt, that he took the coward's way out. Her voice caught. I've been angry with him for 2 years. And now? Now I don't know what to feel, she admitted. Pride that he tried to do the right thing? Grief for the man I misjudged? Rage at Wade? Tokala was silent for a moment. Perhaps all of these, he said finally. My people believe that understanding comes not from choosing one feeling over another, but from holding all truths at once. The wisdom in his words resonated deeply. Your people have much to teach mine, she said softly. And yours have much to teach us, he replied, surprising her. Not all white knowledge is harmful. Your medicine, your writing that preserves wisdom for generations, these are powerful gifts. They sat in companionable silence. The weight of cultural differences momentarily lifted. In that quiet moment, Becca became acutely aware of Tokala's presence beside her. The steady rhythm of his breathing, the warmth radiating from his body in the cool night, the profile of his face against the starlit sky. Something had changed between them since their flight from her cabin, some barrier quietly dissolving. If we succeed, she asked suddenly, what will you do afterward? Tokala seemed surprised by the question. I will return to my people, help them adapt to whatever new boundaries are drawn. He glanced at her. And you? Becca realized she hadn't thought beyond their current mission. Her cabin was destroyed, her life in Griffin's Crossing essentially over. I don't know, she admitted. I can't go back, but I'm not sure where to go forward. Tokala's hand found hers in the darkness, his touch warm and unexpectedly gentle. Perhaps the path will become clear when we reach its beginning. The cryptic statement was oddly comforting. Becca's fingers curled around his, completing the connection between them. They sat that way until the fire burned down to embers, hands joined, neither speaking but both understanding that something profound and fragile was taking shape between them, something that transcended the boundaries of their separate worlds. Dawn brought renewed determination. They broke camp early, continuing westward toward the old Spanish trail. The terrain grew increasingly challenging with steep ravines and rocky passes that slowed their progress. By midday, they had covered less ground than planned, and Green was showing signs of concern. We should have reached the trail marker by now, he said, consulting the crude map he had drawn from memory. An old stone cross set by the missionaries. Unless, his face paled, unless I've led us wrong. Bailey scowled. We can't afford to get lost out here, Sam. We've got limited water and supplies. Before tensions could escalate, Tokala dismounted, examining the ground with the practiced eye of a tracker. He moved methodically, reading signs invisible to the others. Finally, he pointed to a narrow gap between two rocky outcroppings. The old trail goes there, he said with quiet confidence. Many horses passed this way long ago. The stones still remember their hooves. Green looked skeptical, but had no better suggestion. They followed Tokala's lead, squeezing their mounts through the gap into a hidden valley beyond. There, weathered but unmistakable, stood the stone cross Green had described, half buried by time and desert sand, but still marking the ancient Spanish route. I'll be damned, Bailey murmured. Your Apache's got the eyes of a hawk. The discovery lightened their mood considerably. The Spanish trail, once found, proved to be a more direct route than the modern roads. By late afternoon, they had made good time, covering nearly 30 miles since morning. If they maintained this pace, they might reach Prescott in 3 days rather than 4, valuable time saved. As they made camp that evening beside a small spring, a new camaraderie had developed among the unlikely companions. Bailey shared tobacco with Tokala, while Green eagerly questioned him about Apache methods of predicting weather from natural signs. Becca watched the interaction with quiet satisfaction, allowing herself to hope that their mission might succeed after all. That hope was tested shortly before midnight, when Tokala, taking his turn at watch, woke them with urgent whispers. Riders, he said, his voice low. At least 6, moving fast along our trail. They doused their fire immediately, gathering their belongings with practiced efficiency. In the silver moonlight, Becca could see the tension in Tokala's face. Who are they? She asked. Not Apache, he replied grimly. White men, likely Hollisters. Riders, Tokala whispered, his voice low. At least 6, moving fast along our trail. They doused their fire immediately, gathering their belongings with practiced efficiency. In the silver moonlight, Becca could see the tension in Tokala's face. Who are they? She asked. Not Apache, he replied grimly. White men, likely Hollisters. Bailey cursed under his breath. They must have picked up our trail from the stone cross. We can't outrun them, Green said, glancing at their tired mounts. Not in the dark, not on this terrain. Tokala's eyes scanned their surroundings, taking in every detail of the shadowed landscape. We don't need to outrun them, he said finally. Only outlast them. He led them to a narrow cleft between 2 massive boulders, barely visible in the darkness, easy to miss if you didn't know what to look for. The space within was just large enough for the 4 of them and their horses if they stood close. An old Apache hiding place, Tokala explained as they squeezed inside. My grandfather showed me when I was a boy. When they settled into tense silence, listening as the riders drew closer, the sound of hooves echoed off the canyon walls, accompanied by gruff voices and occasional laughter. Becca held her breath as the riders passed within 30 yards of their hiding place. They're sure heading somewhere in a hurry, one voice said. Hollister's paying extra if we catch him before they reach Prescott, another replied. What's he so worried about anyway? Just some woman and an engine? Don't know, don't care. Money's money. The riders continued on, the sounds of their passage gradually fading into the distance. They'll realize they've lost our trail soon enough, Bailey whispered. Then they'll double back. Which gives us a choice, Green added. Wait them out or make a run for it. Tokala and Becca exchanged glances. We're too close to risk being caught now, she said. Prescott is less than a day's ride. If we travel through the night, the Spanish Trail forks about 3 miles ahead, Green offered. West Branch goes to Prescott, but the East Branch leads to the old military road. Might throw them off our trail. Then that's what we'll do, Bung, Becca decided. They emerged cautiously from their hiding place and continued their journey, keeping to the shadows and moving as silently as possible. When they reached the fork Green had mentioned, Tokala dismounted and carefully obscured their tracks leading to the East Branch before they took the western path toward Prescott. The night journey was arduous. The old Spanish trail had fallen into disrepair, forcing them to navigate treacherous stretches in near darkness. Dawn found them exhausted but still moving, the terrain gradually giving way to rolling hills covered in pine forest, a sign they were approaching the higher elevations around Prescott. By midday, they caught their first glimpse of the territorial capital in the valley below. A sprawling settlement of wooden buildings dominated by the imposing governor's mansion on the hillside. We made it, Becca breathed, relief washing over her. Don't celebrate yet, Tokala cautioned. Getting into the city is one thing. Getting to the governor is another. Bailey nodded grimly. If Hollister's men couldn't catch us on the trail, they'll be waiting for us in town. Then we don't all go in together, Green suggested. I know a rancher just outside town, Josiah Everett, fought with me in the war. We can leave Tokala there while we make contact with the governor. Tokala's expression darkened. I did not come this far to hide while others speak for my people. It's not about hiding, Becca said gently. It's about ensuring the evidence reaches the governor. If Hollister's men see an Apache riding into Prescott, they'll stop you before you get within 100 yards of the governor's mansion. Tokala considered this, clearly torn between pride and practicality. Finally, he nodded. Very well, but I will not stay behind for long. Green led them to a modest ranch on the outskirts of Prescott. Josiah Everett, a weathered man with a gray beard and sharp eyes, greeted them warily, until Green explained their situation. So you've got proof that Hollister and his mining consortium have been manufacturing Apache raids? Everett asked, his eyes lighting with interest. I've suspected something like that for years. The patterns never made sense. You know Hollister? Becca asked. Know him and hate him, Everett spat. He tried to force me off my land last year, said there was gold in my creek. When I refused to sell, my barn mysteriously burned down. He turned to Tokala. Your people have been blamed for a lot of trouble you didn't cause, son. Tokala inclined his head, surprised by the unexpected ally. With Tokala safely hidden at Everett's ranch, Becca, Bailey, and Green prepared to enter Prescott. They decided that Green and Bailey would scout the town first, locate any of Hollister's men, while Becca waited with Everett's wife. If we're not back in 2 hours, or if you see trouble coming, you ride for the governor's mansion directly, Bailey instructed. Don't wait. Don't hesitate. The wait was agonizing. Becca paced Everett's small parlor, clutching her father's journals and Natona's bundle of evidence. When the 2-hour mark passed with no sign of Bailey or Green, her anxiety peaked. Something's wrong, she said to Mrs. Everett. I need to go. The older woman nodded, her face grim. Josiah will go with you. Take the back roads to the mansion. Becca thanked her, but as she turned to leave, Tokala appeared in the doorway, his expression resolute. I'm coming with you, he said simply. Tokala, it's too dangerous. This is my fight too, he interrupted. My people's future depends on what happens today. Becca recognized the determination in his eyes and knew argument was futile. Together with Everett, they rode for the governor's mansion, taking a circuitous route through back alleys and service roads. As they approached the imposing building, they spotted Bailey and Green, being roughly escorted into the mansion by several well-dressed men. Hollister's people, Everett muttered. They've got your friends. Or the governor's men arrested them, Becca suggested, her hope fading. Either way, we need a different approach, Tokala said. Is there another entrance? Everett nodded. Service entrance in the rear, used by kitchen staff and messengers. And they tied their horses in a small grove and approached the rear of the mansion on foot. The service entrance was guarded by a single man in a smart uniform, not a rough mercenary like Hollister's men, but an official territorial guard. Follow my lead, Becca whispered, adjusting her clothing and hair. She approached the guard with a confident stride, Everett a few steps behind her. Tokala remained hidden among the trees, watching. Excuse me, sir, she called. I have an urgent message for Governor Safford from Sheriff Franklin of Griffin's Crossing. She pulled out an official-looking document Franklin had given her, a letter of introduction sealed with his office stamp. The guard examined it suspiciously. Why wasn't this delivered through proper channels? Sheriff Franklin said it was too sensitive, Becca explained. It concerns Captain Elias Wade of the cavalry and numerous civilian deaths. At the mention of Wade's name, the guard's expression changed subtly. Wait here, he said, disappearing inside. Minutes later, he returned with an older, distinguished gentleman in a formal suit. I'm Richard Morton, the governor's secretary, he introduced himself. You have information about Captain Wade? Yes, sir, and about a man named Hollister and his mining consortium, Becca replied. It's a matter of life and death. Morton studied her face, then nodded. Follow me, but your companion stays here, he added, gesturing to Everett. Understood, Everett said. I'll wait with the horses. Becca followed Morton through a maze of hallways, her heart pounding. This was it, their one chance to expose the truth. They entered a spacious office where a man sat behind an ornate desk. Governor Anson P.K. Safford was younger than Becca had expected, with intelligent eyes and a carefully trimmed beard. Miss Sinclair, I presume, he said, rising to greet her. Your companions have been telling me a rather extraordinary tale. Becca's eyes widened as she saw Bailey and Green seated in comfortable chairs, unharmed and apparently at ease. Don't look so surprised, Bailey said with a wry smile. Turns out the governor's been conducting his own investigation into Hollister for months. Tax evasion, primarily, Safford explained. But your friends suggest there may be far more serious crimes involved. He gestured to a chair. Please, Miss Sinclair, tell me everything. For the next hour, Becca laid out the entire story. Wade's fabricated Apache raids, the murder of settlers, the land grabs, and ultimately her father's documentation of the Shadow Canyon massacre and his subsequent murder disguised as suicide. She presented her father's journals, the maps from Natona, and the physical evidence from the false raids. Governor Safford listened intently, occasionally asking clarifying questions. When she finished, he sat back, his expression grave. This is far more extensive than I had anticipated, he admitted. I knew Hollister was corrupt, but mass murder, fabricated Indian raids, the deliberate incitement of racial hatred for financial gain? He shook his head. The implications are staggering. There's more, sir, Bailey added. Hollister has connections in Washington, powerful ones. He's been claiming federal approval for his land acquisitions. Safford's eyes narrowed. Yes, I'm aware of his political connections, which makes this situation all the more delicate. He drummed his fingers on the desk, deep in thought. I'll need your sworn testimonies, all of you, and I'll need to speak with this Apache scout. Tokala, you said his name was. Yes, Becca confirmed. He's waiting outside the city. His testimony is crucial. He witnessed Wade's men attacking the Marshall Ranch and staging it to look like an Apache raid. Safford nodded decisively. Have him brought here immediately, but discreetly. If Hollister's men are watching the mansion, he didn't need to finish the thought. Morton was dispatched to bring Tokala safely into the mansion. Meanwhile, Safford had Becca, Bailey, and Green provide sworn statements documenting everything they had witnessed. We have a complication, sir, Morton announced upon returning with Tokala. Hollister is here demanding an audience. He claims these people are fugitives wanted for harboring a hostile Apache and the murder of Captain Wade. Safford's expression hardened. Perfect timing. Show Hollister in, but not his men, and have the territorial marshals standing by. Tokala was quickly ushered into an adjoining room as Hollister was shown in. Jarvis Hollister was a large man with an expensive suit, gold watch chain, and an air of absolute entitlement. His florid face registered surprise at seeing Becca, Bailey, and Green seated calmly in the governor's office. Governor Safford, I demand these criminals be arrested immediately, he blustered. They're harboring a dangerous Apache warrior responsible for the deaths of numerous settlers, and they've murdered a decorated army officer. Safford regarded him coolly. That's quite an accusation, Mr. Hollister. Do you have evidence to support these claims? I have sworn statements from Captain Wade's men, Hollister declared, and legal documents proving my consortium's rightful ownership of the lands these people are trespassing upon. Interesting, Safford replied, his tone mild. I also have some documents I'd like you to examine. He slid several papers across the desk, copies of Wade's orders from Shadow Canyon, maps of the fabricated raids, and Hollister's own correspondence with Wade discussing their arrangement. The color drained from Hollister's face. Where did you get these? He demanded. These are forgeries. Are they? Safford asked. Because they match quite precisely with these. He opened one of Dr. Sinclair's journals to a page detailing the Shadow Canyon massacre, complete with Wade's signature on medical reports, and with the testimony of multiple witnesses, including an Apache scout who observed your men staging fake raids. Hollister's composure cracked. You can't possibly believe the word of an Apache savage over a respected businessman and a U.S. Army officer. The door to the adjoining room opened, and Tokala stepped out, his bearing dignified despite the hostile environment. This savage has a name, Becca said coldly, and unlike you, he has honor. Hollister's eyes darted around the room, seeking an escape. Finding none, his demeanor changed abruptly. Governor, surely we can reach an arrangement. My backers in Washington would be extremely grateful for your discretion in this matter. Are you attempting to bribe me, Mr. Hollister? Safford asked, his voice dangerously quiet. I'm offering you an opportunity, Hollister insisted. Think of your political future, the development potential of these territories. I am thinking of the future, Safford replied, rising from his desk. The future of this territory depends on justice and the rule of law, not corruption and murder for profit. He nodded to Morton, who opened the door to reveal two armed territorial marshals. Jarvis Hollister, you are under arrest for conspiracy, fraud, and as an accessory to multiple murders. As the marshals took Hollister away, his face contorted with rage. This isn't over, Safford. My associates in Washington won't stand for this. Perhaps not, Safford acknowledged after Hollister had been removed. But they'll find it difficult to defend him once the evidence becomes public. He turned to Becca and Tokala. Which brings us to the next challenge, ensuring this evidence reaches the right people in Washington, beyond the reach of Hollister's influence. I have contacts in the Bureau of Indian Affairs, Safford continued, honest men who have been suspicious of these Apache raids for some time, and I believe Senator Carl Schurz would be very interested in these findings. Over the next 3 days, Becca, Tokala, Bailey, and Green worked with Governor Safford and his staff to organize the evidence and prepare comprehensive reports. Hollister remained in custody, despite the efforts of his lawyers to secure his release. More of his men were arrested as territorial marshals uncovered additional evidence of their crimes. There will be a formal investigation, Safford informed them on the third day. Federal officials are already on their way from Washington. Hollister's mining consortium is being dismantled, and their fraudulent land claims are being invalidated. And the Apache lands? Tokala asked, the question that mattered most to him. The boundaries established in the Treaty of 1851 will be formally recognized and enforced, Safford confirmed. It's the least we can do after such egregious violations. Becca felt a weight lift from her shoulders. They had done it. Justice, however imperfect, would be served. Wade was dead, Hollister imprisoned, and the truth about the fabricated raids exposed. That evening, as they prepared to leave Prescott the following day, Becca found Tokala standing alone on the balcony of the guest house where they were staying. The sun was setting over the distant mountains, painting the sky in brilliant shades of orange and purple. Governor Safford says the marshals will escort us back to make sure Hollister's remaining men don't cause trouble, she said, joining him at the railing. Tokala nodded, his expression thoughtful. Your governor is a better man than I expected. He's not perfect, Becca replied. No leader is, but he listens, and he tries to do what's right. They stood in companionable silence, watching the sunset. After everything they had been through together, the danger, the revelations, the moments of connection, Becca felt both closer to him and more uncertain about what came next. What will you do now? She asked finally. Return to your people in the summer grounds? For a time, he answered. They will need to hear what has happened, to understand the new boundaries that will be enforced. He turned to face her. And you? Your cabin is gone. Griffin's Crossing holds painful memories. Becca hadn't allowed herself to think that far ahead. I don't know, she admitted. I've spent so long running from my father's past, trying to atone for his sins. Now that I know the truth, that he was trying to do the right thing, I feel unmoored. You are a healer, Tokala said simply. That doesn't change. No, it doesn't, she smiled faintly. Perhaps I'll travel for a while. There are medical schools in the East that accept women now. I could formalize my training. Tokala studied her face. And the knowledge you have of Apache medicine, the bridge you've built between our worlds? The question hung in the air between them, loaded with unspoken meaning. Becca felt her heart quicken. Some bridges aren't meant to be crossed just once, she said softly. A ghost of a smile touched his lips. My people will need a healer who understands both worlds. The reservation boundaries will be enforced, but that doesn't mean we must remain isolated. There is wisdom in both traditions. Are you offering me a position, Tokala? Oh, she asked, a hint of teasing in her voice to mask the sudden vulnerability she felt. I am offering a possibility, he replied seriously. Not just for healing bodies, but for healing the divide between our peoples. He hesitated, then added, it would not be easy. There would be resistance from both sides. Nothing worthwhile ever is easy, Becca said. She reached out slowly, her fingers brushing against his. It was a small gesture, yet freighted with meaning, a tentative reaching across the chasm of culture and history that separated them. Tokala's hand turned, his fingers intertwining with hers. When we return, I will speak with Natona and the elders. If they agree, we could establish a place of healing where both medicines are practiced, near the boundary, so it could serve everyone. A meeting place, Becca mused, warming to the idea. Not just for the sick, but for learning, for understanding. Yes, Tokala agreed, his eyes holding hers. Understanding is where healing begins. For bodies, for minds, for peoples. The last light of day faded from the sky, giving way to a blanket of stars. They stood together in the gathering darkness, their joined hands a small but profound connection. Neither knew exactly what the future would hold, but in that moment, it seemed full of possibility. 2 weeks later, they stood at the edge of the summer grounds, where Natona and the tribe had made their temporary home. The Apache camp had been established in a high valley, protected by cliffs and dense forest, a natural fortress against potential threats. Natona greeted them with cautious optimism when they shared the news from Prescott. The tribal elders gathered to hear Tokala's account of their journey and the governor's promises. Words from white leaders are like smoke, one elder commented skeptically. They change with the wind. This time there are written documents, Tokala explained, and many witnesses, both white and Apache. The governor has sent federal marshals to enforce our boundaries. The debate continued into the night, with opinions divided on whether to trust the new agreement. Becca observed silently, recognizing that this was not her place to speak. This was a decision for the Apache to make themselves. Finally, Natona raised his hand for silence. My brother has brought us an opportunity, not a guarantee, he said. We have lived through broken promises before, but we have also survived by adapting, by finding new paths forward when old ones are blocked. He looked at Tokala. Tell us of this healing place you propose. Tokala described his vision of a clinic at the boundary between Apache lands and settler territory, where both traditions of medicine would be practiced and taught. Becca would bring her knowledge of white medicine, he explained. I would bring our traditional healing ways. Together we could serve both peoples and build understanding between them. The elders exchanged glances. It was a radical proposal, unprecedented in their experience. And what do you seek from this arrangement? The oldest elder asked Becca directly. Becca considered her answer carefully. I seek to continue healing, which is my calling, she said, and to honor my father's memory by building bridges rather than walls between our peoples. The grandmother healer who had treated Becca's wound studied her thoughtfully. This one has a good heart, she declared. She respects our ways. She does not come to change us, but to learn and to share. After much discussion, Natona announced their decision. We will allow this healing place to be established at the boundary of our lands. For one season, we will see if the white man's promises hold. If they do, perhaps this bridge can become stronger. In the months that followed, Becca and Tokala worked tirelessly to establish their clinic. They chose a location near a clear spring, halfway between the newly enforced Apache reservation and the nearest settlement. Sheriff Franklin helped secure lumber and supplies from Griffin's Crossing. Governor Safford provided official recognition and limited funding. The building they constructed was simple but functional. A main treatment room, storage for medicines and supplies, and separate living quarters for each of them. They planted a garden of medicinal herbs, combining species used in both healing traditions. At first, few came from either community. The settlers were wary of savage medicine, while the Apache were reluctant to trust white healing practices. But gradually word spread. A rancher with a badly broken leg who couldn't make the journey to town, a young Apache woman with a difficult childbirth, a child with fever that wouldn't break. Success by success, patient by patient, they built their reputation. On a warm autumn evening, as they sat outside watching the sunset, Becca reflected on how far they had come. The clinic was thriving. Bailey had settled nearby, starting a small blacksmith shop that served both communities. Green had returned to his ranch but visited often, bringing supplies and news. Do you ever regret it? She asked Tokala. Staying here instead of returning fully to your people? He considered the question, his face thoughtful in the fading light. I am still with my people, he replied. I have not abandoned them. I have extended them. He gestured to the clinic. This place is becoming part of both worlds, not separate from either. Becca smiled, understanding what he meant. Over the months of working together, their partnership had deepened into something neither had fully anticipated. They remained professional in their work, but in quiet moments like this, the connection between them was undeniable. My father would have wanted this, she said softly. Not just exposing Wade's crimes, but building something positive in the aftermath, creating healing instead of division. He would be proud, Tokala agreed. He hesitated, then added, as would my mother. She always taught that true healing comes from balance, between body and spirit, between man and nature. And between peoples, Becca finished. Tokala nodded, his hand finding hers in a gesture that had become familiar and cherished. We are building a new path, Becca. Not Apache, not white, but something that honors both. As the first stars appeared in the darkening sky, they sat together in comfortable silence, their joined hands a symbol of the bridge they were creating, not just between medicines or communities, but between hearts that had found understanding across the divide of history and culture. In the distance, a coyote called, a lonely sound echoing through the canyon. But here, in this place of their making, neither Becca nor Tokala felt alone. They had found their purpose, their place, and each other. Enemies no more, but allies in healing the wounds of the past and building a future neither could have imagined when they first met in a blood-soaked canyon not so long ago.